Flint's Finger was the seat of House Flint of the North, located on the southern shore of Blazewater Bay, north of the Flint Cliffs and east of Cape Kraken. From there, one could see the waters of the Sunset Sea stretching into Blazewater Bay. Some of the small folk living outside Flint's Finger usually relied on their proximity to Blazewater Bay to gather sea creatures and fill their hungry stomachs. Whoa, father, look! So many big ships. A small folk man was taking advantage of the morning low tide to search the shallows for edible shellfish when his young son's startled cry reached his ears. The father lifted his head and saw at least 100 single-masted, square-sailed longships in the distance, all flying the Kraken sigil. The fleet seemed to cover nearly the entire sea. From far to near, it came from the Sunset Sea toward the inner waters of Blazewater Bay. Seeing the Kraken sigil that had once filled him with terror, the man suddenly dropped the shellfish in his hand, turned, scooped up his son, and shouted, "Run, run, the squids are here." His shout immediately drew the attention of the small folk across the shallows. In an instant, everyone began fleeing toward Flint's Finger. After all, more than 10 years earlier, the Ironborn who had ravaged the Sunset Sea had filled every small folk living near the coast with fear. This time, however, the Ironborn had not come for them. Instead, they crossed Blazewater Bay and headed toward the Salt Spear and the Fever River. Among the small folk near Flint's Finger was one unusually calm man. Seeing the Iron Fleet sail toward the Salt Spear, he turned and ran to the house he had temporarily rented for this mission. Before long, a raven spread its wings and flew into the sky. When the Iron Fleet of the Iron Islands reached the Salt Spear, the 10 longships carrying Ramsay and his close retainers broke away from the fleet. Led by Aaron Greyjoy and Dagmar Cleftjaw, they followed the river channels toward Torrens Square. Meanwhile, Victarion Greyjoy, Lord Captain of the Iron Fleet, prepared to land at the Fever River and launch a surprise attack on Moat Cailin. After more than half a day of sailing, Victarion finally landed with 3,300 Ironborn at the headwaters of the Fever River. More than 100 longships lined up side by side, filling the not especially wide river from bank to bank. The Ironborn who had previously gathered information on the Northern Army had already been waiting for a long time. After following the Northern Army to Greywater Watch and releasing a raven to report the situation, they had returned to the Fever River to wait. There was no one here for them to plunder, and they had long since grown bored. They had narrowly escaped Bloodwind's jaws without even knowing it. At the time, after Bloodwind followed behind them and confirmed that they had released the raven, the dire wolf had wanted to treat them as snacks. Robb had stopped him only because he feared startling the prey. Lord Victarion, Moat Cailin currently has only a few hundred archers. They are all defending against enemies to the south and are barely paying attention to the north. And the northern terrain is different from the south. There are no swamps or wetlands there. With so many Ironborn, we can rush them all at once and take the place easily. One of the Ironborn scouts saw Victarion and immediately saluted as he reported, You have done well. Once we take the north, I will reward you with more thralls." Fully armed and carrying a huge axe in one hand, Victarion answered in a deep voice, "Thank you for your reward, my lord. Then let us set out quickly. You lead the way." Of the more than 3,300 Ironborn, Victarion left several dozen to guard the longships. The rest followed the scouts and moved toward Moat Cailin. The more than 3,000 Ironborn moved as a dark, sprawling mass with no formation to speak of. Victarion considered that perfectly natural. He simply lowered his head and marched, making no attempt to discipline them. Several hours later, Victarion and the Ironborn under his command could already see Moat Cailin's 3 towers in the distance. After reaching the hiding place chosen by the scouts, Victarion ordered the Ironborn, somewhat tired from their hurried march, to rest. At the same time, he drew up a rough and simple attack plan. He would lead 1,200 Ironborn to attack the seemingly intact gatehouse tower. Ragnar Pike, a capable man from his Iron Victory, would lead 1,000 Ironborn against the tall, slender Children's Tower, whose crown had lost half its top. Another capable man, Longwater Pike, would lead the remaining 1,000 Ironborn against the Leaning Drunkard's Tower. All 3 groups would sneak as far forward as possible. When Victarion sounded the attack horn, they would attack at the same time and swiftly take the towers while the northern soldiers' attention was on the south. After resting for about half an hour, more than 3,200 Ironborn silently checked their leather armor, weapons, and gear, making their final preparations before battle. Their weapons were varied. Some carried bows on their backs and short daggers in their hands, while others were still accustomed to using longswords. Most of them, however, used short-handled axes. The handles were about a yard long, easy to grip and still powerful enough for chopping. Hooks had also been added to the ends of the axe hafts, likely for hooking ship rails while climbing or dragging enemies in during an attack. Once he was certain they were ready, Victarion exchanged a glance with his 2 capable subordinates. They nodded to one another, then led their men separately toward the 3 towers. Naturally, the Ironborn could not swagger openly down the King's Road. They used the many trees and bushes beside the road as cover, drawing steadily closer to Moat Cailin's 3 towers. A whoa! A long horn sounded, breaking Moat Cailin's calm. Victarion, who had not yet reached the position he wanted, raised his head in stunned surprise to listen. That horn did not belong to the Ironborn. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. North of Moat Cailin's 3 towers, several hundred archers suddenly appeared and loosed a volley toward Victarion's 3 groups of Ironborn. Victarion's force of more than 3,000 men had indeed been using trees and brush for cover. If Moat Caelin's defenders had not been paying attention, they would not have been easy to discover. But the defenders had known in advance that they would come to launch a surprise attack and had been watching closely. This dense rain of arrows drew beautiful arcs through the air and fell accurately into the 3 clusters of Ironborn. Aside from Victarion, who wore heavy armor, the other Ironborn were all in tight leather armor. Such armor might blunt the edge of a blade, but it could not stop the bite of sharp arrows. Beside Victarion, an unlucky Ironborn was struck straight through the eye by an arrow. The sharp point carried blood as it emerged from the back of his skull, and he fell without a sound. Another Ironborn was hit in the chest. The sharp arrow pierced straight through his leather armor and his body. He fell to the ground, vomiting blood and screaming as he grabbed Victarion's leg, begging for help. Crack! The axe in Victarion's hand came down hard on the Ironborn's head, instantly sending red and white matter splattering. What is dead may never die? Damn it, they found us. Blow the horn. Charge, quickly. Knowing they had been discovered and that the surprise attack could only become a direct assault, Victarion gave the suffering Ironborn a swift, clean death. Then he roared and charged first toward the gatehouse tower. Oh, charge. The Ironborn horns sounded. These pirates, who lived by plunder and raiding, shouted fearlessly and charged toward the 3 towers, facing the baptism of the second arrow storm head-on. Advertisement. Torrens Square was the seat of House Tallheart. It stood beside Winterwolves Lake, southwest of Winterfell. Its walls were built of hard stone and rose 30 feet high. A square tower stood at each of the 4 corners, and a square keep occupied the center. As the defensive point southwest of Winterfell, Torrens Square had been built as a fortress meant for war. Lord Aaron, what I just told you is the general state of Torrens Square. Even if fewer than 100 soldiers are left to guard it, there is absolutely no way 300 Ironborn can storm it by force. So tonight, let me trick them into opening the gate first. Then you can lead your men in under cover of darkness and take Torrens Square. After 10 Ironborn longships followed the river into Winterwolves Lake, Ramsay explained the castle's rough layout and offered his advice for the attack. Who said we were waiting until night to attack? Aaron, tall and gaunt, wore a coarse robe. Seaweed clung to his untrimmed hair and beard. He glanced at Ramsay and spoke in a cold, indifferent voice. Not waiting until night? If we go over there like this, they will close the gates long before we arrive. Ramsay looked at the huge Kraken sigil on the sails and asked in puzzlement. King Balon made preparations long ago. Between Winterwolves Lake and Torrens Square, there is a checkpoint. You only need to do as I say and get us near the gate. As for Winterfell, we truly will need more effort from you when the time comes. Lord Aaron, please be at ease. I will certainly help you take Winterfell, and then the entire north. Ramsay answered with a bright smile, bowing slightly and lowering his posture almost submissively. Dagmar Cleftjaw, standing nearby, saw Ramsay's servile manner and let out a disdainful scoff. Ramsay heard it, of course, but he did not react. He simply kept wearing that familiar smile. The 10 Ironborn longships under Aaron's command continued across the vast lake for a while before landing at a hidden place. A large merchant caravan made up of nearly 20 wagons was already waiting there. The Ironborn efficiently hauled the longships ashore and concealed them. Under Aaron's orders, most of the men climbed straight into the cargo wagons, while the rest changed into merchant clothes prepared in advance. In the blink of an eye, the 300 Ironborn became a large caravan carrying a great quantity of goods. At Aaron's silent signal, Dagmar kept close watch on Ramsay, while Ramsay's dozen or so trusted men were scattered throughout the caravan. Those men were not put inside the cargo compartments because their obvious northern accents made them better suited to passing inspection. As the fake caravan moved on, it reached the checkpoint between Winterwolves Lake and Torrens Square. Ramsay, a Northman, handled the talking, and Ironborn spies had already smoothed matters over with silver stags. The soldiers from Torrens Square at the checkpoint gave the caravan only a perfunctory glance before waving it through. Seeing that they had passed smoothly, Aaron and Dagmar exchanged a look. Both of them could see the impatience in the other's eyes as they imagined the plunder to come. But when the caravan drew near Torrens Square, they discovered that the gate was unusually lively. Several hundred small folk were lined up to enter the castle, and many more had set up little stalls nearby, selling all kinds of goods. The Ironborn, who had never been to Torrens Square, saw nothing strange in the bustling scene. But Ramsay's pupils tightened. His gaze flicked discreetly toward Dagmar beside him, while his face remained perfectly calm as he continued toward the gate. Move aside, all of you. These goods are urgently needed by the noble lords of House Tallheart. We do not have time to queue. When he reached the end of the line, Ramsay suddenly shouted at the top of his voice. The small folk heard him. Their noisy talk cut off at once. Then, as if they had only just reacted, they hurried to both sides, clearing a path through the middle. Hearing Ramsay shout without warning, Aaron immediately signaled Dagmar to strike the man standing to his right. But when he saw the path the small folk had opened, Aaron stopped the motion halfway. Clatter, clatter. The fake caravan's wagons rolled forward through the channel between the crowd. Brothers, kill these squid bastards. The instant the entire caravan had entered the crowd, Ramsay suddenly roared. With his right hand, he drew the hidden dagger from his left sleeve and stabbed it into Dagmar's lower back, about 4 inches from the spine. Now, kill them. Ramsay's sudden move was something no one had expected. The small folk waiting on both sides froze for the briefest instant, then reacted at once. They bent down, flipped over the stalls beside them, pulled out the longswords hidden beneath, and cut straight into the Ironborn, who were half a beat too slow. The lively scene before Torrens Square's gate instantly turned into one of blood and death. Ramsay yanked the dagger free. Blood immediately gushed from the wound in Dagmar's lower back like a fountain. Dagmar tried to turn and strike back, but it felt as if all the strength in his body had flowed out along with that blood. He staggered 2 steps, his legs went soft, and he collapsed to the ground. Do not worry. I know exactly where to cut. That stab will not kill you. I will have someone stop your bleeding soon. After all, I have not had nearly enough fun with you. Ramsay looked into Dagmar's hateful eyes, showed him a brilliant smile, and spoke in a low voice. The ambush outside Torrens Square ended swiftly. The Ironborn hidden in the wagon compartments had not even had time to get out before most of those disguised as caravan men were dead. When 100 archers suddenly appeared atop Torrens Square's walls as well, the Ironborn who understood the situation chose to surrender. Aaron, a devout servant of the drowned god, did not surrender. He kept fighting until several soldiers stabbed him full of bloody holes, and only then did he fall, still filled with hatred. Before he hit the ground, his hate-filled eyes stared fixedly at Ramsay, who was standing at the edge of the fighting with a smile. Lord Ramsay, did King Robb ask you to lead these Ironborn into the ambush? He never mentioned it to me before. Still, your move just now was too sudden. We nearly failed to react in time. Lord Helman Tallheart, dressed as a commoner, wiped the blood from his face with the back of his hand and walked over to Ramsay, his tone carrying a trace of complaint. Huh? Of course King Robb asked me to bring these squids here. This was the final purpose of my mission to the Iron Islands. How could we possibly guess King Robb's plans?
Hey everyone, welcome to our channel, and thank you for your support. If there's a favorite novel on the channel and you want the next part, you're just one step away. Become a Patreon member and I can make it depending on your tier. Thank you for your attention.
By the way, Lord Helman, before I set out, you said that if we won, we would drink together in celebration. Does that still count? Ramsay brushed aside Helman's question with a vague answer, then smoothly changed the subject. Of course it counts. But let us handle the proper business first. Lord Ramsay, are these the only Ironborn here? Where are their ships? Lord Helman agreed with a nod, then continued questioning him. Yes, only these men came to attack Torrens Square. More than 3,000 went to Moat Cailin, and another 1,000 went to Deepwood Motte. As for their ships, they are hidden northeast of Winterwolves Lake. No wonder King Robb assigned more troops to Lord Galbart at Deepwood Motte. Lord Helman murmured to himself, then turned and ordered the men beside him, call back the troops lying in ambush along the stony shore. While you are at it, bring back the ships hidden on Winterwolves Lake intact. Be careful not to damage them. King Robb emphasized the ships. Yes, my lord. After the subordinate took the order and left, Lord Helman turned back to Ramsay and made an inviting gesture. Lord Ramsay, please enter the castle. Good. Today we will drink properly. By the way, Lord Ramsay, when you suddenly made your move just now, were you not afraid that we were actually lying in ambush inside the castle? Heh. Torrens Square has never been a trading town. How could there be so many stalls and small folk queuing at the gate? Besides, I spotted you at once, Lord Helman. Your bearing stood out too much to hide in a crowd. Huh? You do know how to joke. Advertisement. Crack. The thick wooden door of the gatehouse tower was chopped open by a huge axe, leaving a gap nearly a yard long. Through that gap, Trog saw at once the hulking Ironborn in heavy armor and a Kraken helm. A spearman standing near the opening drove his weapon straight at Victarion, who was about to break in. Victarion's thick left hand slipped past the sharp spearhead, grabbed the shaft, and yanked hard toward himself. The spearman's strength could not contend with his. He was dragged bodily to the gap. Crack! As Victarion pulled his opponent in, he raised the huge axe in his right hand and chopped fiercely into the opening. The already tottering wooden door split in the middle and collapsed. Victarion's axe did not stop. It bit hard into the spearman's forehead. The panic on the man's face froze there. The huge axe sank deep into his skull, and blood ran down his cheeks. Archers, cover us. Everyone else, prepare to fall back. Trog was not a commander known for his personal strength. He knew very clearly how wide the gap was between himself and the Ironborn in the Kraken helm. So he turned and ran up the stairs at once, calling the archers on the roof down to cover the retreat. Victarion looked like a brute who relied only on raw strength, but he was not that simple. After chopping open the tower door, he did not charge in alone. Instead, he violently tore his huge axe free from the spearman's head, then pointed the weapon, stained red and white, forward. Brothers, charge! The first man to reach the roof may choose his thralls and salt wives. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Inspired by Victarion's promise, the Ironborn howled like madmen and poured through the open doorway. Behind them, the Ironborn archers raised their bows and sent a volley in after them, suppressing the spearmen inside the tower. Without the door to shield them, several spearmen were struck by arrows and fell screaming. The others could not help them. They were too busy stabbing desperately at the Ironborn who had rushed into the tower. Wah! One Ironborn with a one-handed axe stepped on the fallen door and the bodies below, then leapt high into the air as if boarding an enemy ship. His posture was certainly fierce, but the spearmen beneath him only had to raise their spears. The Ironborn landed on the points like meat on skewers, his body punched through with bloody holes. Even so, the Ironborn's morale had been driven to its peak. The spearmen at the tower base suffered heavy casualties. Replacements kept filling the gaps, but the Ironborn pressed them back step by step until they were close to the stairway. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The archers from the roof finally arrived. At such close range inside the tower, their shots instantly took several Ironborn lives. Seeing the situation turn bad, the Ironborn behind them bent down, lifted pieces of the broken door from the ground, and used them to block the deadly arrows. The spearmen seized that chance and withdrew up the tower in good order. Thud, thud, thud. Arrows kept striking the wooden barrier with dull sounds. The Ironborn raised the thick slabs of wood and pressed toward the stairway. Move. Trog took the wildfire jars Robb had left in the tower and shouted to the archers at the stairway. Then he hurled the jars at the Ironborn carrying the broken door. Smash! The jar shattered against the wood, and green liquid splashed across it. After throwing 4 wildfire jars in quick succession, Trog flung several firestones whose tips were already glowing. One firestone ignited the green liquid on the wood, and that terrifying green flame rose once more in the north. Ah! Before the green fire, the thick timber might as well have been paper. It burned through quickly, then spread to the Ironborn behind it. The burning men dropped the wooden slabs and tried to beat out the wildfire, but the more they struck at it, the more of them caught. Some of the Ironborn in the front had not been touched at first, but when the burning men grabbed at them and shoved in panic, both became green torches. Damn it! Wildfire! Fall back! Archers, kill anyone touched by the wildfire! Victarion had sailed far and wide and knew wildfire when he saw it. Realizing the tower truly held another trap, he retreated several steps and gave the order to the Ironborn archers. Whoosh, whoosh! The archers obeyed without mercy, shooting their own burning comrades dead. Crackle, crackle! Inside the tower, green flames burned fiercely across timber and corpses. Outside, Victarion ordered the Ironborn to throw stones and mud onto the wildfire to help smother it. At the entrance to the third-floor stairway, Trog commanded the remaining spearmen to drag every piece of debris they could find into a barricade. Once the wildfire below went out, this would be their last line of defense. The timber used by the supply troops to repair the tower had been chosen for strength and resistance to fire, but at the speed wildfire burned, it still would not last long. Fortunately, Trog did not have to wait much longer. They are here. Reinforcements are here. Not long after the wildfire was lit, the archers on the tower roof suddenly cried out in delight. Inside the tower, Trog heard them and smiled. The pressure bearing down on him finally eased. Rumble! North of the King's Road, hoofbeats like rolling thunder sounded. More than 2,000 cavalry flying the banner of a merman with a trident rushed toward Moat Cailin. When the 31,000-strong northern army had first marched out of Moat Cailin, only a little more than 26,000 had actually left. 2,000 soldiers had been sent ahead to Deepwood Motte, and 1,000 had remained at Torrens Square. The remaining 2,000 cavalry had stayed in White Harbor, the closest city to Moat Cailin, under the name of House Manderley's Riders. After half a day of riding, those 2,000 cavalry finally reached Moat Cailin before it fell. Led by Ser Marlon Manderley, commander of White Harbor's garrison, they did not split their forces. More than 2,000 riders formed a single steel torrent and closed swiftly on the Drunkard's Tower to the left. The fearsome Ironborn excelled at naval battles, fearless boarding actions, and astonishing skill in the water. Now, on land, they were using their weakness against the strength of 2,000 charging cavalry. No matter how high their morale was, it could not save them. The assault on the Drunkard's Tower had progressed far more slowly than the attack on the Gatehouse Tower. The spearmen inside had not even lit the hidden wildfire. Faced with the cavalry charge, the Ironborn outside the tower had nowhere to dodge. Their faces went pale as the riders hit them. Strong northern war horses slammed into the Ironborn, and the riders' longswords alternated left and right, harvesting lives. The Ironborn who had looked so savage moments earlier were now cut down like wheat before the scythe. Before the Gatehouse Tower, Victarion's face turned livid as he watched the enemy cavalry slaughter his men near the Drunkard's Tower. Rumble! Just as he was thinking of joining up with the Ironborn near the Children's Tower and making one last fight of it, hoofbeats sounded again from the causeway between the 3 towers. Victarion turned his stiff neck toward the sound. On the narrow causeway, a ferocious giant dire wolf clad in finely crafted armor painted with the dire wolf sigil was carrying a rider with a greatsword straight toward the Gatehouse Tower. Gods! A monster! What is dead may never die. The Ironborn near the Gatehouse Tower panicked at the sight of the giant wolf, taller and far more fearsome than any warhorse. Men always feared what they could not understand. What are you afraid of? Treat it like an oversized horse? If you want to live and go home, then stand your ground. Victarion roared at the panicking Ironborn, though whether he was trying to give them courage or himself was hard to say. After that roar, feeling courage return to him, he gripped his huge axe in both hands and charged to meet the wolf. The moment he drew close, he swept the axe sideways, intending to cut through the wolf's legs. But the clever beast had already seen his intent. It suddenly lifted both forelegs and reared up, avoiding the sweep. The giant wolf's raised forepaws came down heavily on Victarion, knocking him flat to the ground. Crack! Even in heavy armor, Victarion could not withstand the dire wolf's weight. His chest visibly collapsed, and he spat out a mouthful of blood. Robb sat steadily in the new riding seat built into Bloodwind's wolf armor. Seeing the wildfire burning inside the gatehouse tower and knowing he had arrived a little late, anger crossed his face. Bloodwind, kill him. Awoo! At Robb's command, Bloodwind opened his jaws and bit down on Victorion's head beneath the wolf's paw. The bite failed to pierce the hard, well-made Kraken helm. So Bloodwind clamped down on that armored head, dug both paws firmly into Victorion's body, and wrenched sideways with all his strength. Blood sprayed into the air. Victorion's helmeted head, along with a length of white spine, was torn free by Bloodwind. After Victorion died, the rest of the battle at Moat Cailin ended under the attacks of the cavalry from north and south. Fewer than 1,500 Ironborn remained, and they threw down their weapons one after another, kneeling to surrender. They worshipped the drowned god and believed the words, "What is dead may never die, but rises again, harder and stronger." Yet before absolute strength, so long as a man still wanted to live, anything could be abandoned. Mounted on Bloodwind's back, Robb looked over the broad stretch of kneeling Ironborn, then turned toward the Sunset Sea. "Tywin, you are casting a net," he murmured. "So am I. But your net already has a great hole torn through it. Mine is ready for the harvest." The Eyrie, built of beautiful white stone, stood atop the mountains of the moon, spanning the Vale's greatest peak, the Giant's Lance. Like a temple in the sky, it looked down upon all the Vale below. Although the Eyrie was the smallest of the great castles of Westeros and could hold no more than 500 people, everyone agreed that it was absolutely impossible to take. Unless, of course, one counted the dragons long vanished into history. The Eyrie's sky cells were infamous throughout the Vale. They were laid open against a sheer cliff, and because of the height, cold air blew straight through the prisoners inside. The floor of each sky cell sloped downward as well, and the angle varied from cell to cell. Generally speaking, the steeper the floor, the smaller the cell. Many prisoners held there in the past had been unable to endure the torment of body and mind. Rather than remain imprisoned for long, they had chosen to leap to their deaths. In one small sky cell, Tyrion curled up in a corner with his eyes closed, trying to find some rest. The cold air made him shiver now and then. Click! The cell door opened. A short, fat jailer with small eyes looked at Tyrion and said in a heavy voice, "Get up. The lords want to see you. Mord, perhaps I have been locked up by you for too long. Seeing you now, I find myself feeling something for you." Tyrion had opened his eyes the moment the door moved. Hearing Mord's words, he stood and teased the jailer in his usual irreverent tone. "You want a beating?" Mord was not clever, but he understood Tyrion's tone well enough. He lifted the wooden club in his hand and threatened him. "Certainly not. Let us go quickly. We must not keep your lords waiting." Seeing that familiar club, Tyrion quickly put away the jest and spoke solemnly. The Ares Hall was a circular chamber with 2 levels. Its walls were made of white marble veined with blue. At the highest point stood House Arin's weirwood throne. In the middle of the lower level was a round, closed bronze door. This was the moon door, through which condemned criminals were made to fly. When Mord escorted Tyrion into the hall, it was already full of Vale nobles and a number of small folk watching the spectacle. Lysa Arryn sat on the weirwood throne on the second level with the frail Robin Arryn in her arms. Petyr Baelish, clean and refined in appearance, stood beside her. Ser Roderick, who had been forcibly invited along with Tyrion, stood in a corner. Beside him was a tall, powerfully built old man with grey-white hair and a suit of bronze armor. "Tyrion Lannister, you stand accused of plotting to murder my husband, Jon Arryn, and of sending an assassin to murder my nephew, Brandon Stark. Do you confess?" The moment Tyrion took his place, Lysa set Robin on the weirwood throne, stood, and questioned him loudly. "Lady Lysa, I know a little about many things, but murder is one subject in which I have no expertise at all. I am sorry, but I cannot confess to your accusation." When Lysa turned to serious business, Tyrion put away his mocking expression and answered sincerely. "Lady Lysa, may I say a few words?" Baelish chose the right moment to ask. "Of course, Lord Baelish. Speak." "Thank you." Baelish nodded to Lysa, then turned toward Tyrion and said loudly, "King Joffrey has confirmed that Lord Arryn was poisoned by Hugh, Eddard Stark's squire, on Eddard Stark's orders. As for sending an assassin to murder a child who had fallen from a tower, there is even less evidence proving Lord Tyrion had anything to do with it." "Bullshit. Lord Eddard would never murder Lord Arryn. Littlefinger, insult Lord Eddard's honor again and I will draw steel on you." As soon as Baelish finished, Ser Roderick shouted at him in fury from the hall. "Yes, I believe the nobles of the Vale all trust Lord Eddard's honor. He would never treat his foster father so. If you continue to insult Lord Eddard, the nobles of the Vale will all invite you to answer for it in a duel." The sturdy old man beside Ser Roderick also spoke loudly in defense of Eddard's honor. Oh, Lord Yon, Ser Roderick, please do not be angry. Of course I believe in Lord Eddard's honor. Those words were not mine. They came from the king far away in King's Landing, His Grace Joffrey." Baelish raised both hands toward Ser Roderick and Bronze Yon Royce, trying to calm them. "Pa, we of the Vale have never acknowledged that bastard king." Lord Yon spat in Baelish's direction and answered with disdain. "Careful with your words." While in the sky cells, Tyrion had learned a little of the outside world by bribing Mord. He spoke up in warning. "Legally speaking, King Joffrey is the king to whom all of you swore fealty. If those words reach him, I doubt Lady Lysa will be able to protect you. Enough. Let us see how your lord judges." Lysa, standing on the second level, raised her voice to stop the argument. Then she turned to her son. Robin, thin and weak but in good spirits, heard his mother and immediately jumped down from the throne. In his childish voice, he pointed at Tyrion and said, there is no proof that this dwarf killed anyone. I do want to make him fly, but I declare you not guilty. Huh? Lord Robin is the wisest man in the Vale. This dwarf thanks you. Hearing that he had been released without guilt, Tyrion thanked Robin with a full smile. Lord Robin, King Joffrey invites you to join his small council. Baelish had already told Lysa of Cersei's terms the night before, so now he only stated aloud what could be said in public. Lord Robin, Westeros now has 4 new kings, and they are about to plunge the realm into war. The choice you make will affect the fate of everyone in the Vale. Please consider carefully. Lord Jon knew perfectly well that Baelish was helping Joffrey win the Vale. Since his own heart leaned toward Robb, how could he allow Baelish to succeed so easily? Lord Jon is right. Lord Robin, please give the matter more thought. Yes. I hear the Riverlands have been dragged into the war. Things are terrible there now. The Riverlands have already seen many deaths. After Lord Jon spoke, most of the Vale nobles in the hall agreed with him, and discussion broke out everywhere. Lord Robin will consider this carefully. That is all for today. Seeing so many Vale nobles agree with Lord Jon, Lysa frowned and announced the end in a raised voice. Then she lifted her son and headed toward the moon tower where they lived. Ser Roderick and Lord Jon glared fiercely at Baelish and Tyrion before turning and leaving the hall. Baelish hurried down the stairs and came to Tyrion with a smile. Congratulations, Lord Tyrion. You have won your freedom. Heh. That is thanks to you, Lord Baelish. Be at ease. A Lannister always pays his debts. The clever Tyrion naturally understood Baelish's purpose. He smiled and made his promise. I also brought you a letter from Lord Tywin. Baelish glanced warily around, then took a finger-thick roll of paper from his sleeve. Tyrion accepted it, broke the seal bearing the roaring lion, and opened the letter. Alas, I still cannot leave the Vale. After reading it, Tyrion let out a heavy sigh. Oh, why not? Baelish immediately asked. My dearest father wants me to work with you and find a way to pull the Vale into our camp and bring its armies into the war. Tyrion shook his head helplessly and told Baelish the contents. Heh, I believe we can manage it. But first, we must deal with those 2 stubborn old men. Roderick Castle and Bronze Jon. The Riverlands guarded by House Tully had once been rich, fertile, and densely populated. Its network of rivers allowed people and goods to move with ease. In calmer times, the Trident had been full of fishing boats, grain barges drifting downstream, and merchants' pole boats wandering from bank to bank. But as war broke out, and especially after the mountain began his destructive burning and killing across the Riverlands, great numbers of small folk tried every way they could to flee. Stone River Village sat upstream on the Red Fork, directly north of Pink Maiden. It was a peaceful village that lived by farming and fishing. Now, the village was filled with shrill screams and weeping. 5 Lannister cavalrymen had set every house in Stone River ablaze and driven the survivors to the broad village entrance. One rider was assaulting a woman while the other 4 held the villagers in a circle, laughing as they watched. In the woods not far from the village, Beric and Thoros hid quietly and observed the scene at the village entrance. Those Lannister beasts lit every house in the village on purpose. They want to draw our attention. Beric, this is a trap. Thoros's face was stained with blood, and his red robe was so dirty its color could hardly be seen. After watching the village for a while, he spoke to Beric. Thoros, thank you for staying with me all this way. Without you, I would surely have felt lonely. Beric, just as bloodstained and no longer looking anything like a noble knight, turned and gave Thoros a smile before quietly drawing his longsword. Gulp. I finally understand why my lord showed me that I should preach to you. Beric, the fire in your heart is bright and warm, just like my lord. Hearing Beric's words, Thoros uncorked his wineskin and drank deeply. Then, while carefully drawing his wildfire-coated sword, he praised him with genuine feeling. Thoros, do not follow me this time. If there is no trap, I can handle those beasts. If there is a trap, then I will trouble you to hold a funeral for me. Beric watched Thoros move and shook his head, stopping him. Who said I was following you? Like you, I simply cannot bear the sight of beasts slaughtering small folk. Enough talk. Get ready. Thoros rolled his eyes at Beric, then looked toward the 5 Lannister riders and continued, you take the 3 on the left, the 2 on the right. Before Thoros could finish, Beric struck him hard at the back of the neck with the pommel of his sword, knocking him unconscious. Beric silently looked at the good, somewhat talkative man who had accompanied him along the way. Then his gaze hardened, and he bent low as he crept toward Stone River Village. At the village entrance, the rider committing the assault was gripping the woman tightly, his face twisted in a savage smile as if he could not hear her hair-trending screams at all. Watch out! The rider, lost in his violence, suddenly heard a companion's startled cry. Instinctively, he followed their gaze and looked behind him. A sharp long sword swept swiftly across his neck. His head fell beside the woman, scattering blood. The woman shoved the headless corpse off her in a frenzy, grabbed a stone from the ground, and smashed it again and again into the rider's head. After killing him, Beric picked up the one-handed shield that had been cast aside beside the corpse. By the time he slipped it onto his left arm, the other 4 riders had charged toward him one after another. Beric used the shield in his left hand to block the longsword of the first rider, then thrust his own sword out from beneath the shield and drove it straight into the man's upper thigh. He lifted his left foot and kicked the screaming, wounded rider in the belly, sending him backward into his companions. A rider circling from the left stabbed Beric hard in the left shoulder. Beric clenched his teeth, trapping the blade with his shoulder, and traded wound for wound. His right-hand sword plunged into the rider's eye socket. Beric's swordsmanship was only second-rate, but he dared to risk injury and exchange wounds for kills. Relying on that method, he killed the remaining 3 riders. By the time he was the last man standing, at least 4 sword wounds marked his body. You are safe now. Leave this place quickly. Covered in blood, Beric looked at the villagers gathered at Stone River's entrance. He forced out an ugly smile and spoke gently. Shrrrk? A sharp sound cut through the air and reached Beric's ears. He had only just turned when an iron-headed spear flew through his chest. The force knocked him down and pinned him firmly to the ground. Beric spat a mouthful of blood. As darkness gradually swallowed his sight, he saw the mountain nearby, mounted on a tall horse and riding toward him with dozens of cavalrymen. So the man who kept attacking my cavalry patrols was you, Beric Dondarrion. The mountain rode close to Beric's corpse, pulled the spear free, and spoke in a low voice. Having killed the fly that had harassed them for so long, the mountain happily pointed at the villagers and ordered the riders behind him. I am in a good mood today. Give them a merciful death. Ouch. Thoros, lying on the ground, groaned softly and touched the back of his neck, which still hurt badly. As soon as he recovered a little, he realized what had happened and struggled to his feet. From a distance, he saw the corpses strewn across Stone River's entrance. Thoros hurriedly picked up his sword from the ground and ran toward the village. When he reached the entrance and slowed, eyes blank, the first thing he saw was Beric on the ground. There was a terrible bloody hole through his chest. Blood covered his body. His eyes were still open, but the pupils had fully widened. This good and upright man had come to help because he feared dragging his family at Blackhaven into trouble and because he had heard that war was killing the small folk of the Riverlands. Now he had ended like this. Thoros's eyes grew wet. He stood beside Beric's body in silence for a long while. Then he gathered branches and wood from the nearby trees and piled them over him. Beric, I will fulfill your last wish. Thoros brushed a firestone across his sword. The wildfire-coated blade immediately burst into flame. Holding the torch-like sword, he closed his eyes and prayed with all his heart. The night is dark and full of terrors. My lord, the Lord of Light, let your light shine upon this man and save him from terrible death and endless darkness. The fire in his heart has gone out. May it be rekindled beneath your light. As Thoros prayed, a miracle began beneath the branches and wood covering Beric's corpse. Around the bloody hole where the iron spear had pierced his chest, new flesh grew from the torn meat. The new flesh seemed alive. It quickly filled the terrible wound in Beric's chest, leaving only an ugly round scar. The sword wounds on his body were easier to heal than the hole in his chest. It was as though an invisible tailor had roughly sewn his wounds shut, turning them into ugly scars. Thump, thump. When all the wounds on Beric's body had become scars, his heart began beating again without warning. Ha! Beric suddenly opened his eyes, sat up, and drew in a deep breath. Hearing the sound, Thoros immediately stopped praying and opened his eyes. When he saw Beric sitting up from the pile of wood, he stared in stunned silence, raising a finger, unable to say a word. Gradually recovering his mind, Beric turned to Thoros. A faint smile curved his lips. The night is dark and full of terrors. Rumble? More than 4,000 heavy cavalrymen in finely made Lannister armor, steel lances in hand, launched a massed charge toward the northern army's camp outside the neck. The 100-odd light cavalrymen Robb had deliberately assigned to patrol outside the camp saw the crushing momentum of the charge. They immediately dropped everything unnecessary, yanked their reins around, and fled toward Moat Cailin. Bang, bang, bang. Like heavy siege engines on horseback, the Lannister heavy cavalry entered the northern camp without the slightest obstruction. The thick tents in the camp were either hooked up by lances or smashed apart by the charging horses. But inside those overturned tents, there were no northern soldiers and no supplies at all. They were completely empty. Clatter, clatter. Several thousand Lannister light cavalry who had circled around the two wings also broke into the northern camp with ease. Behind those more than 10,000 riders was the main body of the army, nearly 30,000 elite infantry. At the very rear, Tywin frowned as he watched his cavalry churn the empty camp into chaos and considered where the northern army had gone. Lord Tywin, the Northmen must have discovered our attack and fled back into the neck in a panic, abandoning their camp. Kevin, who had waited at the Twins for Robb in vain and then received Tywin's letter, had brought his hidden troops to join Tywin on the King's Road. Looking at the empty camp ahead, he offered his judgment. Seeing Lord Tywin's 40,000 men, I imagine they were frightened out of their wits. When they flee back to Moat Cailin, an even greater surprise will be waiting for them. Stavron Frey, Lord Valder's eldest son, had joined the Lannister camp with 4,000 men from his house. He laughed as he chimed in. Tywin, expressionless and thoughtful, suddenly rode past the main body of the army toward the northern camp. Kevin and Stavron exchanged a look and quickly urged their horses after him. Behind them followed the Lannister commanders of every rank. After arriving at the flattened northern camp, Tywin dismounted, turned over the remains of a campfire amid the wreckage, and crouched to inspect it. Then he shot to his feet, his voice tight. No, they did not abandon this camp in the last 2 days. Damn it. Something must have happened at Moat Cailin. Splash, splash. The Iron Victory, flagship of the Iron Fleet, rode at the very front, cutting through the waves. Behind it, more than 100 iron-borne longships followed as if in triumph. On the voyage from Blazewater Bay to Pike, every ship that saw the Iron Fleet immediately sped away, afraid of being approached and raided. Lord Sport on Pike had been placed under martial law after fighting broke out over the forced requisition of harbor ships a few days earlier. The bustle of free trade was gone. At the mouth of the harbor, dozens of ironborn longships lay across the water in neat rows, blocking the entrance. An ironborn cleaning a mast looked up and saw the returning Iron Fleet in the distance. Squinting, he could make out ironborn standing on deck along with figures in Greenlander mail. He immediately lowered his head and shouted to the men below, "Lord Victorion's Iron Victory is back, and they have holds full of Greenlander thralls. Looks like the price of thralls is about to fall." "What? We have not even sold the thralls from that passenger ship we robbed, and the price is falling already? Rotten luck. Heh, my farm could use more thralls anyway. I will choose a few strong ones when the time comes." Hearing him, the other ironborn began talking at once, some complaining and some delighted. Ironborn longships were built for raiding. Their speed was twice that of ordinary flat-bottomed merchant vessels. Before long, the Iron Victory led the Iron Fleet close to the mouth of Lord Sport's harbor. Huh? Why are they not lowering sail and slowing down? The ironborn on the mast watched the Iron Victory approach at speed and muttered in confusion. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. A faint rush of air sounded. The ironborn on the mast stared blankly as dense black dots filled the sky and swept toward him. Completely unprepared, he was pierced by the arrow storm until he bristled like a porcupine. Then he fell freely from the high mast and crashed onto the deck. Attack! Attack! The ironborn on the dozens of longships blocking the harbor mouth screamed their warnings after the sudden strike. Thud, thud, thud. The continuous rain of arrows covered the longships at the harbor mouth. Countless sharp arrows stuck into them until the ships looked bristling and thorny. Some of the unprepared ironborn died outright beneath the dense volley. Others scrambled into the cabins or behind anything that could block arrows. All of them were pinned down by the covering fire and did not dare move. The Iron Victory, 200 feet long, used the force of its high-speed approach and struck first. Its hard bow ram drove straight into the side of an ironborn longship lying across the harbor mouth. The impact nearly rolled the longship onto its side. Bang, bang. Once the two shaking vessels steadied a little, the northern soldiers aboard the Iron Victory dropped long planks onto the ironborn longship and began boarding. The ironborn hiding in the cabins and behind cover saw the arrow storm stop and the enemy board. Men who had never feared boarding actions rushed out with weapons in hand. Although more northern soldiers were boarding, the swaying longship rolled beneath the waves. On that shifting deck, their fighting strength could not match the ironborn. Rip! One ironborn with a sharp axe saw a northern soldier lose his footing and seized the chance. He buried the axe in the man's head, shaving away a piece of skull. Blood splashed from the ruined head, and a spurt landed on the ironborn's mouth. "Ah, come on, you Greenlander whores." The ironborn perversely licked the blood from his lips and roared at the sky. As if blood had stirred his savagery, the fearless man charged back up the boarding plank toward the Iron Victory. Awoo! The ironborn had just rushed onto the Iron Victory when his vision blurred. A terrifying giant dire wolf bit him at the waist and lifted him sideways. Hell. The man who had seemed so mad and fearless moments earlier lost all courage once he was in the wolf's jaws. He began to beg for help. Before he could finish, the wolf's jaws clenched. Saw-toothed fangs bit him clean in half at the waist. Awoo! After killing the intruder, Bloodwind stood at the Iron Victory's bow and let out a wolf howl. Because of his weight, Bloodwind wore no armor this time. After howling, he obeyed Robb's command and leapt from the Iron Victory onto the longship, joining the fight. The ironborn on that ship, stunned by Bloodwind, had no strength to resist. He slaughtered them without mercy. Wolf God, mercy. One ironborn, driven to collapse by the bloody killing, saw Bloodwind bite the man beside him in half and then come for him. He threw down his weapon, raised both hands, and knelt, shouting for mercy. Robb had already given Bloodwind permission to accept surrender. Seeing the man kneel, Bloodwind changed his posture and went for other ironborn. When the others saw that surrender worked, they scrambled to throw down their weapons and kneel. After Bloodwind finished with that longship, he used the short distance between ships to leap to the next. With surprise on one side, several times the number of troops on the other, and most importantly Bloodwind in the battle, the fight at the mouth of Lord Sport's harbor was over in moments. The first troops brought by the Iron Fleet were all elite Winterfell soldiers. They obeyed orders strictly, and after victory, they did not immediately search for loot. Instead, they helped disarm the surrendered ironborn, move the longships blocking the harbor, and clear a path into Lord Sport. Standing on the Iron Victory's deck, Robb turned his head and found Theon looking at the ironborn bitten in two, pity on his face. Robb spoke directly to him. "I sincerely invited your father to form an alliance, but he wanted to seize the chance to strike the north from behind and cut off our retreat. If I had not made preparations in advance, you, I, and 30,000 northern soldiers would all be dead before Moat Cailin by now." "Your grace is right," Ramsay said at the right moment. He had met Robb's army at the Fever River after traveling with Lord Helman. "When I was in the Great Hall at Pike," Balon Greyjoy said the same thing. "As long as he took Moat Cailin, Tywin's 30 or 40,000 men would encircle us. Our northern army would be destroyed. Your grace, may I ask you for a chance to persuade my father to surrender?" Theon bit his lower lip hard, then spoke as if he had made a decision. "Of course. That is what I intended as well. Otherwise, I would not have brought you to Pike. As long as you can persuade your father to surrender and pass the kingship of the Iron Islands to you, we can still be allies. Robb nodded seriously. Thank you, Your Grace. Seeing Robb agree, Theon thanked him, excitement written plainly across his face. Ramsay, standing nearby, felt he was beginning to understand this king in the north better and better. Looking at Theon's simple excitement, he curled his lip in disdain. The Iron Fleet now belonged to Robb. It had 110 ships in all. A regular seagoing longship could usually carry more than 100 men, while a large longship like the Iron Victory could carry around 300. Aside from the several hundred surrendered Ironborn responsible for handling sails and steering, this voyage carried 5,500 infantry and 100 cavalry with their horses. Among them, 4,500 infantry and the 100 cavalry were direct Winterfell troops. The remaining 1,000 infantry were Dreadfort recruits. After dealing with the longships blocking the harbor mouth, the Iron Fleet sailed straight into Lordsport. The moment fighting broke out at the harbor mouth, most of the Ironborn in the port had fled toward the square fortress of House Botley, Lordsport's ruling house. Now Lordsport held only Ironborn too old to run and a number of thralls with dull eyes and numb expressions. Robb's army met no resistance and landed smoothly. When Robb stepped into Lordsport, he discovered just how harsh life in the Iron Islands was. Even this busy harbor, with ships constantly coming and going, was made almost entirely of low houses with old stone walls and turf roofs. The only three-story building made of brick and stone appeared, from its sign, to be an inn. Robb left 500 northern soldiers to guard the Iron Fleet's return and continue transporting the rest of the northern army. Then he entered the inn and took control of all Lordsport. Through the captured Ironborn, Cray extracted a great deal of information. The 4,600 Ironborn who had invaded the north were King Balon's entire strength. At most, a few hundred guards remained in Pike. So Robb was not worried that they would abandon Pike and come attack Lordsport. Anxious, Theon made his request to Robb, then found a thrall in Lordsport who knew the way to Pike. The two mounted one horse together and galloped toward the castle. Lord Ramsay, take your 1,000 Dreadfort men and attack House Botley. After Theon left, Robb gave his orders from the comfortable inn. As you command, Your Grace. I will present their fortress to you as soon as possible. Ramsay nodded and declared his loyalty before immediately leaving to gather his men. Cray, take 2,000 Winterfell infantry and besiege Pike. Do not storm it. Just surround it. And shoot down every Raven Pike releases. Yes, Your Grace. Cray nodded, then hesitated slightly before asking, Your Grace, are we not attacking because we are waiting for Theon to persuade his father to admit defeat and surrender? Robb smiled and shook his head, explaining to this trusted subordinate. For years, the Ironborn have been able to raid the western coast of the north because of their mobility. When there are few enemies, they raid. When there are many, they retreat. So this time, I spent enough time and built a large enough stage to lure Balon into the trap, then kill them all in one blow. Once his Iron Fleet abandoned its ships, stepped onto land, and was destroyed or captured by us, they had already lost. Seeing Cray grow thoughtful, Robb nodded inwardly and continued. As for why we are not attacking Pike, it is because its position is easy to defend and hard to take. King Robert and my father paid a heavy price to capture it back then. Apart from iron ore, the Iron Islands are impoverished and not suitable for long-term occupation. Our strategic targets in this war are not the Iron Islands. They are House Lannister in the Westerlands and King's Landing. So whether Theon's attempt at persuasion succeeds or not does not matter. What I want is every ship in the Iron Islands. Surround Pike, and the ships from the other islands will come to us on their own. After hearing Robb's explanation, Cray nodded in sudden understanding and praised him from the heart. Your Grace, I understand now. They were truly unwise to make you their enemy. After a short ride, Theon returned with the thrall's guidance to the castle he had not seen in nearly 10 years. Pike had already learned of Lordsport's fall and was in a state of readiness. The gatehouse stood at the very front of Pike, separated from the main castle by a bridge. Its wall stretched like a crescent of black stone between the cliffs. A rusty iron portcullis protected the wall from attack. 3 square towers stood on each side. Dozens of Ironborn archers on those towers now had their bows drawn and aimed at Theon and the thrall. I am Theon Greyjoy, only son of Balon Greyjoy, king of the Iron Islands. I want to see my father. Theon raised both hands, approached Pike's gatehouse, and shouted. The archers heard him but did not lower their guard. They sent someone to report, while their bows remained trained on the 2 men. After a long wait, King Balon slowly appeared at the gatehouse. Seeing Theon below, he waved a hand at the archers. Only then did they ease their vigilance and relax their bowstrings. What does this little lordling of House Stark want to say? Balon looked down at Theon, dressed like a noble young lord, and spoke with mockery. Father, I am Theon, your only son. This time, I bring the good faith of the king in the north. Let me in so we can speak. Seeing his father, Theon did not mind the ridicule. Joy appeared on his face as he answered. My only child now is Asha. What good faith have you brought? Speak there. King Robb promises that as long as you surrender, he will still make an alliance with you. Hearing Balon's words, Theon spoke directly. Surrender? Heh. How could Ironborn surrender? Besides, I do not believe that little wolf cub. Father, you can be at ease. Robb and I are as close as brothers. Any promise he makes to me will be kept. Asha has already been imprisoned at Deepwood Motte. Since you say you have only one child, you should think of her. Theon tried hard to persuade his father. Knowing Robb's strength, he did not believe Balon still had any chance to turn the situation around. Heh, as close as brothers. Very well, I will consider it. Come in first. Balon sneered and spoke to Theon, then turned to the Ironborn beside him. Open the gate. Once he comes in, put him straight in the cells. Theon, devastated and hollow-eyed, was locked in the dungeon of Pike's bloody keep. He had entered Pike full of hope and lingering affection, wanting to stop his father from fighting a war that could not be won. And this was what he received in return. Since you and that little wolf cub are as close as brothers, I want to see whether he will trade Asha for you. Standing outside the cell, Balon spoke coldly, his face expressionless. Father, so you truly do not regard me as your son anymore. Is that it? From the moment they met, Theon had felt the difference between how Balon and Robb treated him. Hearing that Balon wanted to exchange him for Asha, he asked in a wounded voice. My sons should have been Ironborn like Roderick and Meryn, brave enough to die in battle. Not a fool dressed like a Greenlander whore, calling the enemy who killed his brothers his own. Balon sneered and spoke without mercy. Then he turned to a young, strong Ironborn beside him. Quentyn, arrange men to guard him. Then gather everyone in Pike who can fight and send them to the gatehouse to prepare the defenses. I have already sent ravens to the captains on the other islands. They will soon gather Ironborn and come to our aid. Once they defeat the little wolf cub, the entire north will belong to the Ironborn. Father, you are dreaming. Do you know how strong Robb's Winterfell army is? I know, because I helped train the Winterfell troops myself. Maybe one Ironborn can fight one Winterfell soldier to the death. But when the numbers rise to 10, 100, 1,000, Ironborn in loose formation will only be slaughtered. The entire Iron Islands have only around 20,000 men in all. Robb's army alone has more than 30,000, and he has a giant wolf you absolutely cannot defeat. Surrender? After you surrender, you will still be king of the Iron Islands. You can join Robb's camp and raid the entire south with him. In the cell, Theon gripped the bars with both hands, trying desperately to make Balon understand the difference in strength between the two sides and change his mind. TCH, look at you. House Stark's loyal dog. Balon did not believe him. Instead, he shook his head with disgust. After saying that, he turned and left. The young Ironborn Balon had ordered was Quentyn Greyjoy, Theon's cousin and captain of the longship Salty Wench. Earlier, when he led men to control Ramsay's dozen trusted retainers, a small fight had broken out. His right leg had been injured, so he had remained at Pike and had not joined the invasion of the north. Quentyn stretched his neck to look at Balon walking away, then turned back and asked quietly, Theon, is the king in the north's army really as powerful as you say? And what is this giant wolf? Everything I said is true. Robb's army is formidable in formation combat. If this were a sea fight, you might still have a chance. But now that they have landed, you absolutely cannot defeat him. As for the giant wolf, it is a huge dire wolf he raised. Once it wears armor, it becomes a terrifying, merciless killing monster. Cousin Quentyn, try to persuade my father again. Would surrendering, allying with Robb, and raiding the south for wealth not be the better choice? Theon answered honestly, and at the end he did not forget to ask Quentyn to persuade Balon. Quentyn gave no response. He only limped out of the dungeon. After leaving, Quentyn followed Balon's order and began gathering men for the gatehouse. Even with Ironborn men and women both able to fight, Pike had fewer than 500 people in all. When Quentyn had finished arranging the gatehouse defense, a horn sounded in their ears. They looked toward it and saw a formation of Greenlander soldiers marching onto the open ground before Pike. Step. Cray, who had ridden much more slowly than Theon, finally arrived at Pike with 2,000 Winterfell infantry. They stopped outside the gatehouse archers' range and stood in a quiet, orderly formation. A killing pressure rolled toward the Ironborn on the wall. A terrifying giant wolf in finely crafted armor leapt nimbly onto a small hill and howled toward the Ironborn on the gatehouse. Gulp. Quentyn looked at the armored dire wolf, unable to imagine what could possibly make a beast grow so large, and swallowed hard. No wonder Theon said we have no chance of winning. How could human strength match that thing? Seeing the disciplined ranks of Winterfell soldiers before the gatehouse and the armored wolf dominating the field, Quentyn quietly began to form his own thoughts. The northern part of Pike was a headland, and Pike itself was built upon that headland. The south was made up of gentler slopes that rolled down toward sea level. Lordsport could not be built on the headland, so it had been established to the south, facing Pike from a distance. House Botley's square fortress stood on a relatively flat slope not far from the port. While Pike was surrounded by Cray's infantry and Bloodwind, arranged there by Robb, the square fortress of House Botley was locked in fierce battle with the Dreadfort soldiers. At the outer palisade of House Botley's square fortress, a group of Ironborn women were drawing bows with all their strength and shooting at the Dreadfort soldiers in the distance. The Ironborn truly deserved their reputation as a people in which everyone fought. These women were strong and sturdy, and they drew bows and killed just as well as the men. Thud, thud, thud. Sharp arrows kept striking the kite shields in the Dreadfort soldiers' hands. Most were blocked, but some special Ironborn arrowheads actually pierced the shields. Even then, after being slowed by the shields, those special arrows had too little force left to do much harm to the soldiers behind them. 800 Dreadfort soldiers advanced steadily toward House Botley's square fortress behind their kite shields. Steadfast and fearless Ironborn, it has always been we who invade our enemies. Now these Greenlander whores have invaded our pike. Let us cut off their heads and make drinking cups from their skulls. What is dead may never die. Before House Botley's fortress, more than 300 Ironborn who had fled there from Lordsport and fewer than 100 Botley men listened silently to the speech of Swain Botley, Lord of Lordsport. When Swain raised his arm and shouted, "What is dead may never die," all the Ironborn roared back. With a wild assortment of weapons in hand, they poured out through the opened wooden palisade gate in a disorderly rush. The Ironborn and the Dreadfort soldiers quickly met in close combat. The Ironborn had no formation to speak of. The Dreadfort soldiers' own formation had already begun to loosen during the charge. When several hundred Ironborn hit them, it collapsed at once. The fight turned directly into a bloody melee. One Ironborn chopped off a Dreadfort soldier's left hand with an axe. The next instant, another Dreadfort soldier stabbed him in the neck, sending blood spraying far across the ground. Before that Dreadfort soldier could pull his sword back from the Ironborn's throat, a short spear the length of a forearm flew from an unknown Ironborn hand and drove straight into the soldier's eye. The field before the square fortress became a slaughter yard of blood and torn flesh. A Dreadfort soldier at the rear of the battlefield could not bear the sight of blood and severed limbs. He broke, turned, and ran. An arrow dropped from above and struck precisely into his heart. The Dreadfort soldier fell hard without even having time to scream. TCH. These recruits are useless. At the very rear of the battlefield, Ramsay sat on horseback and lowered the bow in his hand, muttering under his breath. Seeing his own men being pushed toward collapse by half their number of Ironborn, Ramsay turned to his retainer Alan and ordered, "If this continues, those 800 recruits will be broken by the damned Ironborn. Have the archers loose. Lord Ramsay, our men outnumber theirs. If we shoot, our losses may." Alan hesitated. If 2 useless recruits can trade for 1 strong Ironborn, is that not worth it? As for losing men, I suspect the king in the north sent us here precisely so we would lose men. The more men we lose, the more at ease he will feel. Otherwise, if 5 or 6,000 northern soldiers pressed in together, this little square fortress would be flattened in an instant. Ramsay laughed softly and revealed his guess to Alan. Alan nodded, turned at once toward the 200 archers held in reserve, and shouted, "Drawl." The 200 Dreadfort archers hesitated for a moment, then obeyed and drew their bowstrings. Loose. At Alan's command, the 200 archers released. Arrows flew toward the more than 1,000 men locked in desperate battle. 200 arrows fell like rain. Ironborn and Dreadfort soldiers alike were struck and dropped. Arrows knew no friend from foe. Flesh on the battlefield was pierced without mercy. 1 volley, 2 volleys, 3 volleys. The arrow rain seemed endless, turning the men concentrated on that piece of ground, enemy and ally alike, into corpses bristling with shafts. Swain, struck by an arrow in the left shoulder, watched with his own eyes as his second son, Tristifer, was turned into a pincushion by the storm of arrows. Seeing fewer and fewer Ironborn around him, his face filled with grief as he shouted, "Retreat! Back to the fortress!" The Ironborn near Swain heard him and shouted the order as they ran toward the fortress behind them. More and more Ironborn heard the cries to retreat. Covered in blood, they broke away from the battle and rushed back toward the fortress, afraid the enemy would pursue. In truth, the Dreadfort soldiers behind them no longer had the courage to continue chasing. The morale of these Dreadfort recruits was already on the edge of collapse. If Ramsay had not ordered the merciless volley that struck both sides, they would absolutely have been broken by Ironborn numbering only half as many. Ramsay frowned at the soldiers shrinking back on the battlefield. He was just about to shoot a few men to establish authority, then offer a heavy reward to drive them forward and seize the fortress in one push, when a Winterfell rider came up beside him. "Lord Ramsay, King Robb commands that you must not take this fortress before sunset tomorrow." The rider reached Ramsay and delivered Robb's order. "Good. Before sunset tomorrow, I will certainly take, must not take it." Ramsay had already begun making his promise when he realized what he had heard. He stared at the messenger in surprise. "Yes. King Robb emphasized that you are not to take this fortress. He also told me to say that you do not need to return to Lordsport. Make camp where you are. Tents and supplies will be sent to you." "I understand. Then I will return with your answer." Seeing Ramsay nod, the rider immediately turned his horse and left. Watching his back, Ramsay frowned and muttered to himself, "He wants me to attack this fortress, but not take it. What is this king in the north planning now?" Unable to understand it, Ramsay simply shook his head and ordered Alan to begin clearing the field. Once the tents and supplies arrived, they would make camp. Not long after the messenger left, a transport column made up of many Lordsport thralls brought Ramsay the tents and supplies. After delivering the supplies, the column did not leave. Following Robb's command, the thralls left the wagons outside the camp and joined Ramsay's force. As for the king in the north, who currently had him completely under his thumb, Ramsay could only obey every order. Night gradually fell. Cray's troops surrounding Pike and Ramsay's troops around House Botley's fortress both made camp and lit fires, one to the north and one to the south, facing each other from afar. Splash, splash. At the dark mouth of Lordsport's harbor, 40 longships with their square sails furled moved silently over the sea like ghosts in the night. These 40 longships carried the ironborn forces gathered by the noble houses of Great Wick and Saltcliffe. Because their islands lay close to Pike, they had already finished gathering at Saltcliffe that afternoon. But they had not sailed for Pike at once. Instead, they waited until night fell before creeping toward the island under cover of darkness. As pirates who often sailed far across the seas, the ironborn had to know how to navigate at night. Saltcliffe was also extremely close to Pike. These ironborn knew the surrounding waters so well that they could have sailed along the coast with their eyes closed and still not lost their way. With their sails furled and rowers working hard, the longships moved quickly toward Lordsport, which was just as dark. Lordsport was utterly silent. Aside from the ever-burning lighthouse, there was not a single candle flame. It looked like a dead city. After the longships approached the harbor, the ironborn aboard quickly laid down planks and rushed into Lordsport with weapons in hand. Chief Gormond, the brothers searched the port. There is no one in Lordsport, and the valuables and supplies are gone too. The Greenlander whores must have looted it clean. They also saw many campfires outside Pike and some outside House Botley's fortress, though far fewer there. A shorter man with long loose hair reported to Gormond, good brother, temporary commander of the 40 longships and chief from Great Wick. Gormond was a powerful man. He wore the leather armor typical of ironborn, but around his waist was a distinctive belt made from the hair of spotted goats. Gormond nodded and stroked his beard. After a moment's thought, he said, the letter from Pike said about 2,000 men had surrounded them. Lordsport must already have been looted. Now the enemy is preparing to loot Pike and House Botley separately. Chief Dunner, send a few brothers to scout the enemies outside House Botley. If they are few, we strike them first, join House Botley, and then attack the enemy around Pike together. Dunner Sunderly, the shorter chief from Saltcliffe, nodded and immediately arranged scouts. Gormond ordered the noble houses to count their men and prepare for battle. The 40 longships carried 2,300 ironborn warriors in all, a relief force assembled by 5 noble houses from 2 islands. Soon, the ironborn familiar with Pike returned from scouting and reported the enemy's situation. When Gormond learned that the enemies surrounding House Botley numbered fewer than 1,000, even counting some thralls, he immediately ordered the household chiefs to take their warriors and launch a night attack. For ironborn, there was no need for tactics or formations. They only needed to do one thing, kill every enemy. Gormond led a dark, sprawling mass of ironborn quietly toward the camp where the Dreadfort soldiers were stationed. Whoosh, whoosh, several arrows shot out of the darkness. In the Dreadfort camp, a few sentries on watch were struck and dropped at once. Kill them all. What is dead may never die. Ironborn roars followed. 2,300 men charged the camp with weapons in hand. A volley of arrows flew flat from the Dreadfort camp, cutting down the ironborn at the front just as they were about to reach it. Inside the camp, Ramsay's face looked terrible. By the firelight and moonlight, he could barely make out the black mass of enemies. Because Robb's strange order had occupied his thoughts all day and kept him from sleeping, Ramsay had deliberately arranged his 700-odd soldiers to rest and stand watch in turns. So when the ironborn attacked, he was able to organize some archers to strike back at once. So that damned Robb Stark used me as bait. Damn it. These Dreadfort recruits alone cannot beat this many ironborn. I need to find a chance to escape. As soon as Ramsay saw the enemy's numbers, before the real battle had even begun, he was already preparing to flee. The ironborn in House Botley's fortress heard the fighting as well. Lord Swain gathered the remaining men again and charged toward the Dreadfort camp. Because the distance was so short, the Dreadfort archers only had time to shoot a second volley before the howling ironborn rushed into the camp. Another bloody melee began. Inside the camp, Dreadfort soldiers and ironborn hacked at one another in confusion. Ramsay held a bow, accurately shooting any ironborn who came too close while moving toward the camp's only dozen or so horses. Suddenly, from a low slope to the left of the Dreadfort camp, hundreds of specially made burning arrows flew like fireflies across the sky toward the rear half of the ironborn army that had not yet reached the camp. Thud, thud. Those special arrowheads caused serious harm when they struck ironborn. Some even killed a man and set his corpse alight. But their main purpose was not to kill. Around the outside of the Dreadfort camp stood many transport wagons deliberately placed there by thralls under Robb's orders. When the fire arrows struck those wagons, they quickly began to burn, lighting the whole battlefield as bright as day. Rumble! The sound of 1,000 galloping horses rose from the low slope on the left. Seeing the rear of his army struck by fire arrows, Gormond immediately understood that he had fallen into a trap. He shouted, "Ironborn of Great Wick, turn and face the enemy. Cavalry are approaching from the rear." The Ironborn of Great Wick under Gormond immediately passed on his order. The Ironborn army split in two. One part continued attacking the Dreadfort camp, while the other stopped in place, gripped their weapons, and turned to await the enemy cavalry behind them. Rumble! As the enemy cavalry rapidly approached, the firelight from the burning wagons let Gormond see that these Greenlander riders were hundreds of heavy cavalry whose horses were also armored. Run! Into the camp. Gormond, who knew enough to understand the terror of heavy cavalry, lost all will to fight. He shouted and turned to run first. But fleeing from charging cavalry already close at hand was even more foolish than facing them. Bang, bang, bang. 500 heavy cavalry charged straight into the fleeing Ironborn by the bright firelight, instantly knocking down the men at the rear. Those Ironborn fell before they could even struggle to their feet. Countless hooves trampled over them, crushing them into soft, ruined corpses. Shrrrk, shrrrk, the heavy cavalry's lances stabbed Ironborn again and again. The savage, cruel men who usually terrified others had become lambs fleeing in every direction. Behind the 500 heavy cavalry were 500 light cavalry. They followed the bloody path opened by the heavy riders and continued harvesting Ironborn lives. The Ironborn outside the Dreadfort camp scattered in panic. Those who had rushed into the camp were still fighting, while the Ironborn from House Botley's fortress were approaching. On the low slope to the left of the Dreadfort camp, Robb sat astride a warhorse and looked down at the chaotic battlefield. He gave an order to Owen, commander of the Winterfell infantry, beside him. The fish are in the net. Blow the horn and tell them to close it. Owen nodded and immediately blew a dark horn in his hand. The long horn call rang out. 2,000 elite Winterfell infantry hidden in the darkness around the Dreadfort camp quickly formed a circular formation and advanced in ordered steps, enclosing the camp. The first to make contact with the Winterfell infantry were actually the outermost Ironborn led by Swain. He thought these closing Winterfell soldiers would be as brittle as the Dreadfort soldiers from earlier that day, so he led more than 200 Ironborn back to meet them. The Winterfell infantry advanced in neat formation. Shieldmen in front held the defense, and the spearmen behind them attacked. With only one orderly thrust, dozens of Ironborn who had no time to dodge were stabbed full of bloody holes. Swain Botley, Lord of Lordsport, was pierced by 2 spears and died in the first round of attacks. Winterfell cavalry rode back and forth outside the camp, cutting down Ironborn, while the infantry surrounding the camp used spears to reap lives efficiently. In the light of tonight's raging fires, the blood looked even redder. Beside Lordsport's 40 longships, the dozens of Ironborn Gormand had left to guard the ships also heard the horn from House Botley's direction. Just as they gathered and began talking among themselves, a huge dark shadow with eerie green eyes used the darkness as cover and approached at speed. Whoosh, whoosh, dozens of arrows shot out from the darkness of Lordsport. More than half the Ironborn guarding the ships fell instantly. Awoo! After the arrow storm, Bloodwind burst from the dark and bit one Ironborn dead, then freely slaughtered the rest, who had no ability to fight back. Dozens of Winterfell soldiers who had followed Bloodwind back from Pike under Robb's order swiftly took control of the 40 Ironborn longships that had delivered themselves into his hands. Pa! Ramsay struggled in a pile of dead war horses and finally managed to push half his body free. He immediately spat out a mouthful of mud mixed with blood. A squad of Winterfell infantry carrying torches were checking corpses and finishing off the wounded. When they saw Ramsay forcing his way out from among the dead horses, they came over with spears in hand. I am on your side, Ramsay Bolton of the Dreadfort. Ramsay saw the Winterfell soldiers as well. He quickly wiped blood from his face and shouted. By torchlight, one Winterfell soldier recognized him and nodded. It is Lord Ramsay. Brothers, help him out. The other soldiers immediately moved the dead horses aside and pulled Ramsay free. He was so smeared with thick blood that he was nearly unrecognizable. Lord Ramsay, His Grace is outside the camp. Some brothers might not recognize you in your current state. I can take you to him. Good. Thank you. I will remember you, and I will reward you properly later. Looking at the soldier who had recognized him, Ramsay nodded his thanks. Led by that man, Ramsay skirted the Dreadfort camp, now carpeted with blood and corpses. From a distance, he saw Robb standing outside the camp. At that moment, beyond the Dreadfort camp, a dark mass of Ironborn prisoners knelt on the ground. Nearly 1,000 cavalry and infantry stood around them with weapons in hand, surrounding them tightly. Robb was speaking with several Ironborn who looked like leaders. After Robb nodded in confirmation, Owen, the Winterfell infantry commander at his side, led cavalry and infantry to escort all the prisoners toward Lordsport. Ramsay, good. You are safe. I was very worried about you just now and ordered them to find you no matter what. Robb looked Ramsay over from head to toe. Seeing his miserable state, he smiled and spoke. Thank you for your grace's concern. I led the Dreadfort soldiers to face more than twice our number without fear of death. We fought bravely and finally delayed them long enough for your grace to destroy them. After thanking him, Ramsay forcibly turned his position as tactical bait into the key to victory. Robb raised an eyebrow, then answered, of course. Lord Ramsay's contribution was indispensable. The Dreadfort soldiers fought bravely, and now fewer than 100 remain. Then, these 1,500 prisoners will be your reward. They will be placed under the Dreadfort to replenish your strength. This battle had lured the Ironborn deep, surrounded them, and destroyed them. Winterfell's cavalry and infantry had suffered very few casualties. The surrounded Ironborn treated the enemies inside the Dreadfort camp as their main target. Of the more than 1,000 Dreadfort soldiers and thralls, fewer than 100 survived. Of course, the Ironborn had suffered even greater losses. More than 2,500 Ironborn had joined the battle, and those tough, fearless men lost more than 1,000 dead, almost half their number, before finally surrendering. Hearing that Robb was giving the captured Ironborn to him as a reward, Ramsay forced a smile and said, Thank you, Your Grace. I will tame them well and continue fighting for you. Good. You worked hard. Let us return to Lordsport first. When you are ready, you can find Owen and receive the prisoners. Yes, Your Grace. After nearby soldiers brought horses for them, the two rode toward Lordsport. The cleanup of this battlefield and the now defenseless Botley fortress would be handled by others. When Robb and the others entered Lordsport, the port had regained a human presence. Campfires and lamplight shone together, as if the whole harbor had suddenly come alive. Bloodwind had sensed Robb's approach early. As soon as he entered the port, the terrifying giant wolf feared by countless men acted like an overgrown hound, pressing close and asking for praise. Playing with Bloodwind was more tiring than killing enemies. After roughhousing with him for a while, Robb began making the final arrangements for the day. After this battle, the Iron Islands no longer had any chance to turn the situation around. The surviving leaders from Great Wick and Saltcliffe had already chosen submission. From what Robb had learned, Great Wick was the largest of the Iron Islands, and its strength was second only to King Balon's. The smaller islands that had not yet joined the fighting could gather at most another 3,000 Ironborn warriors. Robb did not need to do anything now except hold Lordsport for a few days. By then, aside from the 2,000 soldiers left at Moat Cailin, the rest of the more than 20,000 northern troops would all arrive in the Iron Islands. When nearly 30,000 troops pressed down on them, the remaining small islands would either submit or be destroyed. After ordering his men to guard the 40 Ironborn longships carefully, Robb had several dozen Winterfell soldiers under Cray pack the heads of Swain, Lord of Lordsport, and Dunner, the chief from Saltcliffe, together with his handwritten letter, and carry the box to Pike. By the time those Winterfell soldiers reached Cray's camp before Pike with torches in hand, it was already deep night. After Cray heard Robb's order relayed by them, he sent a messenger under a white flag to deliver the wooden box containing the 2 heads and the letter beneath Pike's walls. When Quentin and the other longship captains in the gatehouse saw the heads and the letter, their faces all changed in different ways, and all of them had different thoughts. Without King Balon's command, however, they could not surrender even if they wanted to. Quentin, still young and still carrying many ambitions in his heart, gritted his teeth. Quietly, he called several crewmen from his own longship and, while no one was paying attention, slipped into the darkness of the gatehouse. Late at night, beneath a full moon, a group of soldiers moved along the only causeway leading into the north before Moat Cailin. Their mouths were shut tight, and each man gripped the collar of the comrade in front of him with one hand, using the bright moonlight to feel their way forward at an extremely slow pace. The 3 towers standing on either side of the causeway like monsters in the dark suddenly lit many campfires. The archers atop those towers lit hundreds of specially made fire arrows from the flames and shot them at the soldiers attempting a night raid along the causeway. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The fire arrows inflicted terrible damage on the soldiers marching in dense formation. Those killed outright suffered least. Those who were hit in the body and survived, only to have their leather armor catch fire, rolled left and right on the ground while screaming in agony, trying to put the flames out. Some fire arrows fell into the rotten swamp beside the causeway and went out. But a few happened to ignite the marsh gas trapped in bubbles just before they burst, causing sudden blooms of open flame. Those flames did not have enough gas to keep burning for long, but the sight was terrifying. The soldiers who had wanted to launch a night attack were ambushed in such surroundings. They no longer cared about charging the towers or keeping formation. They scattered in every direction, thinking only of survival. Splash! Because overseers behind them blocked the retreat, many soldiers who could not fall back jumped into the waist-deep rotten swamp and tried to circle around. Some unlucky ones stepped into natural traps beneath the water. Their faces filled with fear as they struggled and slowly sank into deep pits in the swamp. And in the darkness of the rotten marsh, there were more than natural traps. Many black logs with eyes and teeth floated half-submerged in the water. These black logs were lizard lions, shaped somewhat like crocodiles. They hunted by sight and smell. When they saw soldiers willingly jump into the swamp, they used their long tails to swim closer. Then they suddenly opened mouths full of dagger-length teeth and bit down on the prey that had delivered itself to them. They seized the panicked, screaming men and dragged them into the muddy water, leaving only clouds of fresh red blood drifting on the surface. Stavron stood behind the causeway and watched the 3 towers light their campfires. Soldiers clearly dressed as Northmen kept shooting arrows and killing his men, while the soldiers of House Frey knew only to run in panic. Even the overseers behind them could not stop the rout. He sighed heavily, ordered the man beside him to retreat, and turned back to camp to report to Lord Tywin, who had placed such hope in him. Inside the command tent of the Lannister army, Tywin listened silently to Stavron's report. After hearing it, he nodded. He did not blame Stavron, but instead offered several words of encouragement, sending the flattered man out of the command tent in excitement. So it was that fool Balon after all. Moat Cailin is still in the little wolf cub's hands. If he shuts himself in now, our entire arrangement has failed. After Tywin sent away the simple-minded Stavron, Kevin spoke with a grave expression. If only Moat Cailin had gone wrong, I could accept it. What worries me is the Iron Islands. No, Balon burned our Lannisport years ago. Whatever else he is an old and seasoned king of raiders. Tywin's face showed neither joy nor anger. He analyzed matters rationally, then suddenly turned his words and ordered Kevin, tomorrow morning, take your army and continue the siege of Riverrun. You have been away for many days, and I worry something may have changed there. So long as you can take Riverrun, we will stand unbeaten in this war. By then, the wolf cub will only be able to hide in the north, and the wealth of the Riverlands will be ours to use as we please. Yes, I will do everything I can to take Riverrun as soon as possible. Whether at Moat Cailin or on Pike, the long, bloody night gradually passed. The next morning, the sun rose from the sea and drove the darkness from Westeros. Ah, someone, come quickly. In Pike's main keep, a thrall's scream shattered the damp, dark stillness. Because nearly all the Ironborn in the castle were at the gatehouse, a good while passed before Quentyn arrived at the Lord's bedchamber with 5 longship captains. In the middle of the lavish chamber, half a rope hung from a beam. Below it, Balon, cut down by several thralls, lay quietly on the floor beside the other half of the severed rope. Aside from bulging eyes and a twisted face, Balon was very still. Nothing of his earlier madness and ferocity remained. King Balon could not bear the pressure of the siege and hanged himself. Quentyn looked at Balon's corpse and delivered his conclusion in a certain tone. The moment he finished, 4 of the Ironborn captains exchanged glances and chose silence. The oldest captain frowned and stepped forward. After carefully examining Balon's body, he said to Quentyn, "Quentyn, saying King Balon killed himself is far too careless. When a man hangs himself, the mark on his neck should lie beneath the jawbone and form a V-shape." Hearing the captain's analysis, Quentyn immediately limped forward. He circled Balon's corpse, then came to stand beside the captain and said softly, "Indeed. It seems." Before Quentyn could finish, his right hand drew the dagger he had prepared long ago, and he stabbed the captain repeatedly in the belly. "Ah, you." The captain had only time to scream once before he died beneath the storm of stabs. Quentyn lifted the captain's corpse in both arms and threw it out through the sea-facing window of the Lord's bedchamber, into the sea that accepted all things. After doing this, Quentyn turned back to the other 4 captains, his body stained with blood. "You saw the result of last night's battle in the wooden box sent by the king in the north. The leaders of the other islands have already surrendered. Rather than end up packed in boxes ourselves, we might as well surrender to the king in the north and follow him to raid the green lands of the south. Now I say King Balon hanged himself. Does anyone still object?" And no. The 4 captains who had helped defend the gatehouse and had seen the might of the Winterfell soldiers, as well as the box of heads, swallowed nervously and answered together. In the dungeon of the Bloody Keep, Theon sat dazed in his cell, his heart turned cold by his own father. He regretted it deeply. He had been a commander at Winterfell in good standing, yet he had insisted on worrying about this cold and heartless father, and now he had been locked in a cell. Yesterday, he had commanded thousands of soldiers and held a position higher than some northern lords. Now he was a prisoner. The fall naturally stirred all kinds of thoughts in him. Tap, tap. Uneven footsteps approached. Quentyn, changed into fresh leather armor and wearing a grief-stricken expression, came to the cell. He unlocked the door, walked inside, and dropped to one knee before Theon, who stared at him in confusion. "Your father could not bear the pressure and has hanged himself. Euron is exiled, Victarion and Aeron are dead, and Asha is imprisoned at Deepwood Motte. Now, as the sole lawful heir to the Seastone chair, Theon Greyjoy, I, Quentyn Greyjoy, offer you my fealty. Please ascend the Seastone chair and make an alliance with the king in the north. Father is dead. I will become king of the Iron Islands." The news from Quentyn brought Theon both grief and joy, but for a man personally imprisoned by his father and left to be exchanged for Asha, joy was inevitably greater than grief. After a moment, Theon, who was about to gain the throne he had dreamed of for years, straightened his chest and nodded to Quentyn. "I accept your fealty. From now on, we are brothers who share salt and iron. Now let me out. I need to see the king in the north." Robb had never expected Theon to bring him such a great surprise first thing in the morning. In the inn at Lordsport, Robb quietly listened as Theon, with faint sadness, described how his father had imprisoned him, then declared with great excitement that he would become king of the Iron Islands. Watching Theon continually share both sorrow and joy with him, Robb nodded inwardly. Putting everything else aside, the young Greyjoy truly did regard him as a brother. "Theon, rest easy. I will help you sweep away every obstacle and seat you on the Seastone chair. Then we brothers will crush the Westerlands together and fight our way into King's Landing." Robb smiled, extended his right hand, and spoke with sincerity. Theon nodded heavily. He gripped Robb's hand with his right hand and said, greatly moved, "Robb, even if I become king of the Iron Islands, you will still be my brother and my king. I will follow you into war and help you sit the Iron Throne in King's Landing." "Good. Then we advance and retreat together." After the two confirmed their offensive and defensive alliance, Robb had Owen bring in the Great Wick nobles captured the previous night. The leaders headed by Gormund had no objection to the news that King Balon had killed himself and Theon would ascend the Seastone chair. In their explanation, the victor was king and the defeated were prey. Since Balon was dead, that proved he had lost the ability to lead the Ironborn. As Balon's only lawful heir, Theon should naturally take the throne. In Robb's view, however, Gormund and the others simply knew how to read the situation. Once the Iron Fleet had changed hands, the Iron Islands no longer had the strength to resist the entire north. After gaining Gormund's support, Theon immediately sent letters to every noble house on the other islands, ordering them to come within 3 days and witness his coronation and drowning. If they did not, then after his coronation he would personally lead an army to destroy their houses in the name of punishing traitors. The day after the letters were sent, the Iron Fleet arrived at Lordsport again with more than 10,000 northern soldiers. Whether because the nobles on the other islands had seen the North's strength or not, by the third day all the Iron Islands nobles had gathered at Lordsport. They landed there, saw Robb's troops and the mighty Blood Wind, and most of the Ironborn nobles chose silence. Even if some of them had objections in their hearts, they would not show them now. At noon that day, in a bay on pike filled with Kraken banners, Theon's coronation and drowning ceremony was held. Today, we bear witness to the drowning of Theon Greyjoy, true heir of House Greyjoy. Does any iron-born object, a priest of the drowned god, his body hung with iron ore and chunks of salt, pointed to Theon beside him and spoke. When the priest finished, an old man with snow-white hair and a thick white beard, broad and sturdy despite sitting in a chair, finally seized the chance to speak. I, the anvil breaker, Eric Ironmaker, object. Awoo! Eric had only just opened his mouth when Bloodwind, receiving Robb's thought, leapt swiftly across the rocks. He arrived before the old man's chair and bit off the head of Eric Ironmaker, the anvil breaker, with jaws full of saw-like teeth. The rest of Eric's words died before they could be born. Ask the question again. Robb, smiling, looked around at the ashen-faced ironborn nobles and spoke loudly to the priest of the drowned god. Why yes. Today, looking at the anvil breaker's head being chewed in Bloodwind's mouth, the priest nodded and repeated his question in a loud voice. When the priest finished, only the sea wind and the sound of waves filled the bay. No voice of opposition remained. Theon Greyjoy, come forward for your drowning. Seeing no one object, the priest spoke to Theon. Theon turned and gave Robb a grateful look, then walked to the priest's side. The priest pushed Theon down into the seawater and chanted loudly, "Let your servant Theon Greyjoy be reborn from the sea as you were. Give him the blessing of salt. Give him the blessing of stone. Give him the blessing of steel. What is dead may never die, but rises again, harder and stronger." This ceremony was a trial from the drowned god. The one being drowned had to drown in seawater. If he could not endure it and died, it meant he was unworthy and the drowned god had not accepted him. Only if he endured could he formally inherit the seastone chair. In truth, the difficulty of the ceremony depended on how quickly the priest chanted. This priest had received Robb's specific instruction beforehand. He chanted at great speed, then pulled Theon up just as he had swallowed a mouthful of seawater and begun coughing. Seeing that Theon was all right, the priest placed a wooden crown called the Crown of Salt and Rock on his head and shouted, "What is dead may never die. What is dead may never die." The surrounding iron-born nobles answered together. Thus, the Iron Islands welcomed a new king of House Greyjoy, one influenced by Robb and different from the iron-born kings shaped by old tradition. On the very day Theon sat the seastone chair, he ordered every house to muster its remaining longships and warriors. He promised that this time, he would lead them to plunder wealth beyond anything they had ever dared imagine. Seeing the imposing northern army, the iron-born nobles also wanted to follow and take their share of meat. They offered up their houses, longships and fighting men. Several days later, more than 310 iron-born longships, together with 25 large longships built for war, carried a combined northern and iron-born army of more than 33,000 men and sailed in a grand fleet toward the Westerlands. At the same time, Tywin's army remained near the neck, Kevin's army had surrounded Riverrun again, and the mountain's cavalry continued burning, killing, and looting throughout the Riverlands. Far away on the continent of Essos lay a red land of low hills, wind-scoured plains, and dry riverbeds. It was called the Red Waste. The air across the entire wasteland was dry, the trees were sparse, and aside from scattered patches of grass, there was no sign of life. Jorah Mormont, who had not slept all night and looked worn with exhaustion, slowly walked toward the burned-out pyre ahead. 3 blood riders moved with him. Drogo's Khalasar had already split apart, and the eyes of the remaining people followed them toward the center of the pyre. Amid the blackened ash, a naked woman with silver-gold hair sat cross-legged with her head lowered. Hearing the sounds around her, she raised her head. Ash covered her face, yet her unmatched beauty remained clear. Her luminous purple eyes calmly watched Jorah and the 3 blood riders. 2 creatures that looked like winged lizards lay weakly in her bare arms. Another, visibly stronger, climbed out over her right shoulder. Newborn dragons. Jorah, utterly shocked, recognized the 3 lizard-like creatures in an instant. He dropped to one knee before Daenerys Targaryen and said, "Blood of my blood." Hiss. Hearing him, Daenerys silently stood. On her small, upright naked body, one hatchling wrapped its wings around her left leg, one coiled around her left hand, and the strongest perched on her right shoulder, spreading its wings and growling softly. As that young dragon gave a low growl that already carried a hint of majesty, every remaining member of the Khalasar knelt sincerely before the mother of dragons, the woman unburnt by flame who had birthed dragons. Above their heads, a red comet dragged its long tail across the blue sky, declaring that the world from this day on would be different. On the narrow sea, a fleet flying the banner of the Fiery Stag was sailing toward Storm's End in Shipbreaker Bay. Inside the flagship, a stern-faced man with a powerful build and only a thin line of black hair left on his head turned to the beautiful woman beside him. She wore a red robe, had red eyes, and copper-red hair. "Renly has nearly 100,000 men. Are you certain I can win?" "Of course, Your Grace Stannis. You are the one chosen by my lord. In my lord's revelation, I have already seen the death of the false king Renly Baratheon." The red-robed beauty smiled with her heart-shaped face and answered, "Good." Stannis did not smile at her words. He seemed to remember something and continued asking, "And what of what you said before? What revelation does that thing in the sky represent?" "It is my lord's sign that he will help you clear away the false kings. I can feel something awakening within my body." The red-robed woman lifted her eyes toward the deck, as if seeing the red comet in the sky above, and spoke with a deeper meaning in her voice. "In the Riverlands, along an unnamed stretch of the river road. Thoros, are you certain those beasts will take this road?" Beric, hiding in the woods on both sides of the road with more than 50 small folk armed with all manner of weapons, turned and asked those behind him. Gulp. They will. The mountain is occupying Harrenhal to rest for now. This cavalry patrol just looted the town ahead. They will certainly bring their plunder and prisoners to him. Thoros first uncorked his wineskin and took a hard drink, then explained to Beric. Good. I hope there are not many of them this time. I do not matter. But I do not want too many of these brothers who just joined us to die. After all, they are not like me. Beric turned to look at the dozens of male small folk who had joined him because their homes had been destroyed, their kin killed, or for other reasons. He spoke quietly to Thoros. Beric, you should value your life. My lord granted you a miracle, yes, but that does not mean you will rise again next time. Hearing Beric speak that way, Thoros felt that he was taking his own life too lightly and reminded him in the same low voice. I know. They are here. Beric was answering when he saw, at the road ahead, a patrol of nearly 30 Lannister cavalry escorting several transport wagons toward the ambush. The wagons held supplies, but also captured small folk. The prisoners in the barred wagon cages included men, women, old people, and children. The Lannister cavalry advanced boldly, unaware of the ambush hidden in the trees ahead. Or perhaps, ever since the mountain had killed the bastard who often attacked their scattered cavalry, they had not been attacked again. Their vigilance had long since loosened. The leader of this Lannister patrol was Burton Crake Hall, younger brother of Lord Roland Crake Hall of Crake Hall in the Westerlands. As a man specifically chosen by the mountain, Burton was also broad, powerful, and thick-set. Whoosh, whoosh. Just as the Lannister riders reached the ambush point, 7 or 8 arrows struck at them. The archers were small folk hunters, and the bows in their hands were not finely made war bows. Aside from one arrow that accurately struck a cavalryman in the right eye and sent him falling from his horse, the others failed to pierce the rider's well-made armor. Some bounced away, while others hung limply from the plates. Ambush. Burton reacted with a loud shout. His right hand drew the round-headed mace at his waist, and he urged his horse toward Beric and the others as they rushed from the trees. He swung the mace and smashed it into the right side of a small folk man's face. The man had been wielding a sickle, and blood sprayed everywhere. The blow sent the man straight to the ground. Half his face had been torn away by the spikes on the mace head. Beric, to the left of Burton's horse, seized the chance and chopped his longsword hard into the horse's left leg. The warhorse screamed as its leg was severed, taking Burton down with it. Beric wanted to move forward and check Burton, but another cavalryman entangled him. While he fought to kill that rider, Beric unexpectedly noticed Thoros staring blankly at the flaming sword in his own hand. Thoros, what are you doing? After dragging the rider from his horse and cutting his throat, Beric shouted at Thoros. Hearing Beric's shout, Thoros snapped out of his daze. He immediately charged forward with the flaming sword to help. Beric and his men, though nearly twice the number of the Lannister cavalry, fought with great difficulty. If not for one hunter with decent aim who kept shooting Lannister riders, the ambush they had launched might have become a trap that killed them instead. Beric, with 2 light wounds, had just finished off a Lannister rider when he looked up to assess the field. He discovered that Burton, who had fallen from his horse earlier, was not dead. The man was killing one small folk after another with his mace. Their eyes met. Then both charged at each other. This time, one exchange decided the outcome. Burton's round-headed iron mace smashed heavily into the right side of Beric's head. A shattered eye fell with the blood, and the right side of Beric's skull was crushed. Beric's long sword thrust up from below, drove deep through Burton's chin, and pierced straight into his head. The 2 men died together. With Burton gone, the surviving Lannister riders lost their core and were quickly killed by Thoros and the others. When the fighting ended, Thoros dropped the flaming sword in his hand and ran to Beric at once. He pulled the round-headed mace from Beric's head and immediately began reciting the prayer from last time. My lord, the Lord of Light, let your light shine upon this man. On a prison wagon full of captives, an old man with grey-white hair and a face lined with wrinkles noticed what Thoros was doing. He did not understand it at all, but confusion filling his wise blue eyes. As Thoros prayed, the shattered right side of Beric's head rapidly healed. Only after the right eye socket restored itself did it become clear that the eye within had not returned, leaving a frightening black hollow. Beric, dead for the 2nd time, suddenly sat upright. He had been resurrected again by Thoros's prayer. Creak. Inside the prison wagon, the old man saw Beric return from death and gripped the bars tightly with both hands. Besides disbelief, his eyes showed a hunger for knowledge that burned like flame. Winterfell, the inner castle. In his room, Bran kept his eyes tightly closed. He felt as if he were inside an incredibly vivid dream. He dreamed that he had become a dire wolf, running freely through the Godswood. The wolf lifted its head and looked at the red comet in the sky, then swiftly ran to the little lake in the Godswood. By the clear, still water, it saw itself. It was summer. Just as Bran woke from the dream and opened his eyes, in Winterfell's kennels, the separate wolf dens temporarily converted for Nymeria and Lady each held a captured large grey wolf with them. Drawn by the scent released by the she-wolves in heat, the 2 large grey wolves could no longer wait and moved forward to mate. As the mating neared its end, faint red mist began rising from Nymeria and Lady. The mist seemed affected by something. It churned constantly, and the eyes of Nymeria and Lady gradually turned blood red. Whine. Once the mating ended, the 2 dire wolves suddenly turned and bit the grey wolves' throats. In both dens, the grey wolves lost their lives amid miserable low whimpers. Then Nymeria and Lady began tearing into their bodies. At the wall, Castle Black. Jair Mormont, Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, watched the busy rangers prepare horses, weapons, dried food, and other necessary supplies. They would pass beyond the wall to search for Benyon Stark and investigate the mystery of the wildling's disappearance, to see what exactly was brewing, or already happening, out there. Jon, who had wanted to go south and join Robb's army, had been talked down by his brothers of the Night's Watch, including Sam. Maester Aemon and Lord Commander Jair had both spoken with him at length. Creak, creak, the iron gate at the base of the wall opened. Jon turned to look around. Sam, Dolorous Ed, Gren, and the other brothers close to him all looked nervous. Among the nearly 300 other brothers of the Watch, some were just as nervous, while others were calm. Among the recruits Euron had brought back from King's Landing, 2 strange-looking strong men had also joined this ranging. One was called Biter. His tongue had been cut out, so he could not speak and could only make hissing sounds. The other was Rorge. His body was covered in black hair, and he had no nose. When Rorge first arrived at Castle Black, his filthy mouth had made him very easy to hate. After Jon gave him a proper beating, he had become much more obedient. Still, Rorge, who often kept company with Biter, feared and hated Jon and the others. Move out. At Lord Commander Jair's order, the patrol of nearly 300 men rode through the passage beneath the wall in a long, orderly line. Hot Pie, the plump boy assigned to work in Castle Black's kitchens, watched their backs and thought silently about how many of them would ever return to Castle Black. Far beyond the wall, in the far north, deep within the vast haunted forest, a huge and flourishing weirwood grew on a hillside. Beneath that hill lay a complex system of caves. In one broad cave, an old man with white hair was embedded among countless tangled weirwood roots. His exposed skin was completely pale, his body skeletal, and his clothes ragged. The weirwood roots passed through his thighs and emerged from his shoulders. Dark red leaves grew from his bones, and grey mushrooms occupied his forehead. A thin root crept down his cheek from one empty eye socket and burrowed into his neck. The white-haired old man, who looked more corpse than living person, suddenly opened his remaining eye. It was blood red and deeply unsettling. Great three-eyed crow, what is happening outside? In the corner of the cave, a small humanoid creature with dark skin and a beautiful face wore clothing woven from leaves, with bark strips as leggings. She opened her mouth and asked in the common tongue of Westeros. "Puh." The three-eyed crow, bound in the weirwood roots, first spat a mouthful of blood. Then he answered weakly. "All the heart trees south of the wall have withered and died. It was done by those ignorant humans sent by the one who destroys the future. Leaf, you must warn the other children of the forest. In the not-too-distant future, war will come here." Seeing the three-eyed crow spit blood again, the child of the forest named Leaf immediately spoke with concern. "I will warn them. But the grave wound you suffered last time has not recovered, and now every heart tree south of the wall has withered away and died. If this continues, you, who have long since exceeded the lifespan of mortal men, do not worry about me. The time for my departure has not yet come. Now, I can feel that something outside has changed. The power within my body is awakening." The three-eyed crow spoke slowly, and his blood-red eye slowly closed. "Besides, I have already chosen the next three-eyed crow." On the Sunset Sea, the 500-foot Great Kraken rode the wind and waves. Robb, feeling restless, came onto the Great Kraken's deck with Bloodwind, who was sending him the same irritable thoughts. At a glance, he saw the red comet hanging in the sky. The red comet. Then Daenerys Targaryen has already been reborn from the flames with 3 dragons. Understanding what the red comet represented, Robb instantly had that thought. As he considered the future, red mist flickered around his body, and the desire for blood and killing in his mind gradually rose. "I am about to lose control? How is that possible? After Bloodwind's last slaughter, I only had 53 blood pact points. That is nowhere near the threshold. Damn it. Nymeria and Lady are not at my side, so I cannot spend the points on them." Feeling that he was about to lose control, Robb hurriedly turned his gaze to Bloodwind beside him. Name, Bloodwind. Contractor, Robb Stark. Physique, 30. Speed, 30. Strength, 30. Pack, Psychic Dire Wolf, 6. Wolf Pack, War Wolf, Nymeria. Servant Wolf, Lady. Blood Pact points, 53. The Blood Pact has changed again. Pack can be increased to. Add points. Quickly. As red mist rose from Robb and sank into Bloodwind's body, the desire to kill in Robb's mind gradually calmed. Since points could be added, and the great battle about to begin would certainly bring no shortage of Blood Pact points, Robb poured in 56 points without hesitation, leaving only 1 point so he would not weaken before the fighting started. But this addition to the pack attribute was unusual. The 56 Blood Pact points sank in like a drop of water entering a calm lake. There was no visible reaction at all. Does it need even more Blood Pact points? Robb stroked the smooth fur beneath Bloodwind's neck, guessing at the most likely reason. "Awoo." Bloodwind, enjoying the touch, lowered his head and saw Robb's thoughtful expression. He stretched out his tongue and licked Robb's palm, then raised his head toward the red comet in the sky and howled. Lannisport was one of the 7 Kingdoms' most important harbors and the largest city in the Westerlands. In size, it was much smaller than King's Landing and Old Town, but far larger than Gulltown and White Harbor. Apart from its excellent location and the prosperity brought by seaborne trade, the harbor city was most famous for producing all kinds of precious gold work. House Lannister had remained powerful for many years because it possessed its own particular strengths. Gold mined from Casterly Rock was transported to Lannisport and made into valuable gold objects, which sold throughout Westeros and even in Essos. The immense wealth gained from this trade established House Lannister as the richest family in Westeros. Especially during the decades in which Tywin Lannister ruled the house, the Lannisters' status in Westeros had climbed higher and higher. For that reason, sayings like a Lannister always pays his debts and Tywin Lannister shits gold had long since surpassed House Lannister's own words, "Hear me roar," in the mouths of common people. In truth, however, the gold mines of Casterly Rock had been exhausted long ago. Only fools fixed their eyes on the gold of the Westerlands. Only mediocre men saw House Lannister's wealth and mistook it for the foundation of their power. Gold was only dead metal. It was only the shell wrapped around House Lannister. The strength of the entire Westerlands came from Tywin's decades of rule. Nobles and small folk alike praised Tywin's greatness and achievements. Under his powerful rule, he not only raised House Lannister's external prestige, but also brought unity within the family. Unity produced strength. One could even say this, if not for the influence of foolish descendants, the House Lannister Tywin forged truly might have quietly replaced House Baratheon and become the royal house ruling the Seven Kingdoms. At Lannisport's harbor, many merchant ships were docked, along with the Lannister fleet. Because of King Balon's rebellion against Robert years earlier, the Ironborn had burned the Lannister fleet to ashes 10 years ago. The current fleet had only been rebuilt in recent years. As for its combat ability, it could barely protect Lannisport from pirates in nearby waters. A flat-bottomed merchant ship that had paid all manner of taxes and fees departed Lannisport, bound for Gulltown, the Vale's most important harbor. After passing through the harbor mouth and gradually drawing away from Lannisport, it sailed toward the Shield Islands. Then, across the entire visible horizon, hundreds of Ironborn longships with Kraken sails spread wide came rushing toward it at great speed. Everyone aboard the flat-bottomed merchant ship looked desperate. Even if they turned now, there was no way to avoid the swift longships. With the captain offering a heavy reward, everyone aboard took up weapons. Resolved to die, they prepared for one last stand. They had no other choice. The notorious Ironborn would not only seize the wealth of merchant ships, but also take the people aboard as thralls. Any merchant ship that encountered them was bound to fight to the death. But today was this ship's lucky day. The Ironborn longships covering the sea did not approach to board them. Instead, they sped past on both sides of the flat-bottomed merchant ship. The merchant captain was staring in confusion at the longships that had left them untouched when a massive warship passed by. At its bow was a huge grey iron ram shaped like a kraken. From the tall Ironborn warship, an armored giant dire wolf looked down upon them like a monster. Its eyes seemed to be measuring prey, and everyone aboard the merchant ship felt a cold fear rise from deep within, the fear prey felt before an apex predator. As hundreds of Ironborn longships swept past, the merchant captain swallowed nervously and looked toward the direction of Lannisport. Quickly, full speed, get away from here. Something enormous is about to happen at Lannisport. At the Lannisport Guard headquarters, Stafford Lannister sat on a comfortable reclining chair and directed his men as they registered new recruits. He was Tywin's cousin and the younger brother of Tywin's wife, Joanna Lannister. Tywin knew Stafford had no talent for command. Before marching out with most of the Westerlands forces, he had arranged for Stafford to recruit and train new soldiers in the Westerlands in case they were needed. Originally, Stafford should have been recruiting in villages not far from Lannisport. But Stafford's son, Daven Lannister, was commander of the Lannisport Guards. So Stafford used his son's convenience as an excuse to abandon the poor villages and come to the comfortable guard headquarters in Lannisport to recruit men. Clang, clang, clang. A sharp, loud alarm bell rang out. Stafford immediately rose from his chair. This was the warning bell from the harbor tower, and it had not rung for nearly 10 years. It was rung in only one situation: a large enemy force was invading Lannisport. Stafford had already recruited more than 2,000 new soldiers. After a brief hesitation, he ordered his men to gather the recruits, distribute weapons and equipment, and prepare to take them to support the harbor defense. When he led the loosely formed recruits out of the guard headquarters, normally prosperous Lannisport had fallen into chaos. Merchants ran everywhere clutching goods, and small folk fled with their families in tow. Weeping, cries for missing loved ones, and screams mixed together into a deafening clamor. Stafford was leading the recruits against the flow toward the harbor. Seeing the road ahead blocked by panicked small folk crowding together as they fled, he frowned, drew his sword, and cut forward. A civilian woman was struck in the neck. A great spray of blood burst from the gaping wound. When the other small folk saw this noble lord draw steel, they screamed and fled into the side streets, clearing the road ahead in an instant. Stafford had already formed the intent to kill. His hand showed no mercy. In this way, treading a road of blood, he brought the recruits behind him, whose faces were filled with pity and discomfort, to Lannisport's harbor. There, hundreds of Ironborn longships with Kraken sails occupied the entire harbor. On the left bank of the harbor, the 60 or 70 oared warships of the Lannister fleet were now surrounded by more than 3 times their number of Ironborn longships. Countless soldiers were already fighting boarding battles from ship to ship. Nearly 100 more Ironborn longships, including large warships, were spreading out and landing all around Lannisport's harbor. Judging by the sight, the Ironborn had not come merely to plunder. They were preparing to occupy Lannisport entirely. Stafford saw his son Davin leading nearly 2,000 well-equipped Lannisport guards in formation before the harbor, preparing to meet the enemies landing from those near 100 Ironborn longships. Whoosh, 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 a heavy sound cut through the air. The Ironborn's large warships were actually equipped with siege engines like catapults. Dozens of stones the size of millstones flew toward the Lannisport guards arrayed at the harbor. Bang, bang, bang. On the rolling sea, the inaccurate catapults struck the guard formation with only a few stones. Most of the others either smashed into merchant ships of every size docked in the harbor or crashed into shops and buildings behind them, punching millstone-sized holes through walls. Even so, the flesh and blood bodies of the Lannisport guards could never withstand the large stones that did hit them. Any guard unlucky enough to be struck was left with roughly half a body, the other half turned into a blurred mass of flesh. The Lannisport guard formation immediately began to show signs of disorder. But it was not over. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. As nearly 100 Ironborn warships rapidly approached, a sharp rush sounded. Arrows that seemed ready to cover the entire sky arced high and fell over Lannisport's harbor like rain. These arrows were far more accurate than the catapults. The guards covered by the rain of arrows immediately suffered heavy casualties. In truth, this alone showed that the Lannisport guards had not fought a real battle in a long time, and that their commander had made an obvious tactical mistake. Their advantage was familiarity with Lannisport. They could have used buildings and streets to fight a mobile urban battle, seizing the terrain in their favor. Instead, they had formed up at the front like cavalry awaiting a charge. After these two ranged attacks, the guards had lost hundreds of men, and their morale was falling quickly, already showing faint signs of collapse. Bang, bang, bang. Because all kinds of merchant ships were docked in Lannisport's harbor, the Ironborn longships that had not slowed down drove their bow rams straight into those merchant vessels and then used them as bridges to begin landing. From the distance earlier, Stafford had not seen clearly. Only now did he realize that among the soldiers preparing to land, only a small number were dressed like typical Ironborn. Most were actually dressed as Northern soldiers. Lord Tywin and Lord Kevin are fighting the Northmen. How have so many Northern soldiers all come to Lannisport? Seeing such a large number of Northern soldiers, Stafford could not understand what was happening at all. Lord Stafford, do we retreat, or? Seeing Stafford's blank expression, one of his men spoke to remind him. Stafford finally reacted. He turned toward the recruits behind him, most of them frightened, and shouted with a face full of grief and fury, "Of course we fight these bastards invading our home to the last drop of blood. Warriors of the Westerlands, charge, charge, kill." Hearing Stafford's roar, the recruits summoned their courage and charged toward the harbor with weapons in hand. When Stafford saw the man who had reminded him truly about to draw his sword and charge, he grabbed the man's wrist, glanced around, and whispered, "Do you have a death wish? Go call my son back. I will wait for you here. Lannisport cannot be held. We are returning to Casterly Rock." "Ah, yes, my lord." Only then did the subordinate understand Stafford's meaning. He nodded at once and ran toward Davin, who was working hard to reform his formation. When the man reached the middle of the harbor, a large warship with a huge gray iron ram shaped like a kraken at its bow smashed a small merchant vessel docked there clean in two. Using the resistance of the broken merchant ship, the warship stopped almost perfectly beside him. Stafford's man was not harmed by the kraken warship, but a huge black shadow descended from above and landed squarely on him. Crack! A crisp sound of shattering bone rang out. The man spat a great mouthful of blood. With a flash of final strength, he stretched out both hands, trying to push away the giant paw on his caved-in chest. But with all his strength, he could not move it in the slightest. As that strength faded, his hands dropped limply to the ground. Stafford stared in shock at the armored giant wolf that had trampled his man to death. On the back of that armored wolf sat a fully armed knight holding a greatsword. Having never seen such a wolf rider, Stafford turned and ran. In his eyes, perhaps only the dragon riders of old Targaryen legend could surpass such a sight. Robb watched a wisp of red mist rise from beneath Bloodwind and sink into his body. Sitting high on Bloodwind's back, he looked around the prosperous harbor. On the left, the Lannister fleet had no ability to resist enemies 3 times their number. Meanwhile, the 7,000 or 8,000 men he had brought were landing at the harbor head-on and engaging the 1,000-odd Lannister soldiers. Judging by numbers alone, it should be a one-sided situation. For this attack on Lannisport, Robb had used neither a night raid nor any other stratagem. He had attacked openly, directly, and head-on. Because he knew Tywin had drawn away the overwhelming majority of the Westerlands forces, leaving Lannisport with at most a few thousand defenders. War could not always depend on clever maneuvers. A chance this good to overwhelm the enemy by strength was perfect for letting his army assault a position head-on. And this time, since he was short on blood-pact points, he could add points to Bloodwind at any moment. Ever since Bloodwind's loss of control, Robb could finally unleash him without restraint again. "Bloodwind, see the men wearing that armor? We charge where they are thickest. We have held back and stayed cautious for too long. Today, we kill to our heart's content." Seeing the overall situation decided, Robb patted Bloodwind's finely made wolf armor and spoke. Hearing him, Bloodwind, whose killer instinct had already been stirred by blood, launched himself toward Stafford's nearly 2,000 recruits with terrifying force. "Ah, monster! Everyone, attack the monster behind us first." Bloodwind's huge body naturally drew the recruits' attention. One of them immediately shouted, Among the Lannister recruits, a small portion saw Bloodwind rushing toward them and were so frightened their legs went weak, leaving them standing frozen in place. Most of the others still managed to gather courage. They raised their weapons and turned to charge back at Bloodwind. Bang, bang, bang. Just as the two sides were about to meet, Bloodwind, already used to hiding part of his physical ability, suddenly accelerated and slammed straight into the Lannister recruits before they could react. Men and weapons flew. Several recruits were struck by Bloodwind and hurled away. The one sent farthest fell directly into the harbor water. Rip. Inside the mass of recruits, Bloodwind alternated his giant paws, each tipped with sharp claws, and kept attacking the men ahead. Those struck by his claws first gained several deep tearing wounds, then were sent flying by the enormous force. The men who took Bloodwind's claws head-on basically died on the spot, small wisps of red mist rising from their corpses. Those who did not die at once were still grievously wounded beyond saving, falling to the ground like broken dolls and gasping out their last breaths. As red mist sank into Bloodwind, Robb, riding on his back, felt strength continuously surge up inside his body. The length of ice, the greatsword in Robb's hand, happened to reach the heads of the Lannister recruits. So any recruit struck by him either had his entire head cut off, or had half or a smaller piece of his head left hanging from the corpse. One Lannister recruit tried to attack from behind Bloodwind. Sensing it, Bloodwind nimbly turned while thrusting his jaws forward, directly seizing the bold recruit. Bloodwind tossed the recruit backward into the air with a forceful swing of his head. As the soldier screamed in terror, ice came chopping down in Robb's hands and cut him in two with a single stroke. Splash! Bloodwind quickly carried Robb away from that spot. Only then did the soldiers' two halves rain down behind them with a torrent of blood and organs. Looking at the horrifying slaughter performed by Robb and Bloodwind in concert, the northern soldiers who had seen Bloodwind's might before could still adapt somewhat. They only swallowed quietly to suppress the discomfort brought on by the bloody scene. One Ironborn who had charged with Robb stood frozen where he was, stunned speechless. He kept muttering, "Good thing we are allies. Good thing we are allies." Compared with King's Landing or Old Town, the Lannisport guards responsible for maintaining order were actually known for being well trained. Because they had not seen war for a long time, they lacked experience, and at the beginning, their concentrated formation had almost been broken by ranged attacks. But once battle truly became close combat, their strict training allowed them to withstand the impact of the northern soldiers and the Ironborn. After cutting down an Ironborn holding a mace, Davin took a moment to glance over the harbor. Fall back. There are too many enemies. Return to the streets we know, divide into our usual patrol squads, and fight them there. Unlike his father, Davin had real talent for command. Although his lack of war experience had hurt him at the start, he grew quickly. One look let him judge the rough situation and think of the proper response. After Davin's order spread, the remaining 1,300-odd guards fought while retreating, falling back toward the town streets behind them. Streams of red mist continued sinking into Bloodwind's body as Robb continued adding points to him as the battle went on. But the pack attribute was like a bottomless pit. Including the previous 52 points, Robb had already invested nearly 150 blood-pact points, and still there was no reaction. From another angle, however, this was exactly what Robb wanted to see. It made it easier for him and Bloodwind to use their full strength. Rip! Bloodwind killed the recruit before him with one claw. There were no more enemies directly ahead. Robb and Bloodwind, one man and one wolf, had cut straight through the recruits' formation. Behind them, a small portion of the recruits were still fighting the northern soldiers and Ironborn who followed Robb, while the vast majority had thrown down their weapons and were fleeing madly into the town of Lannisport. In truth, Robb and Bloodwind had personally killed fewer than 100 recruits. But the way they killed, and the image they presented, was far too terrifying. Robb sat high on Bloodwind's back, observing the current situation. By now, Lannisport's harbor was basically under the Northern Army's control. He looked toward the 1,000-odd guards retreating in good order into the town, then spoke to the messenger who had just caught up, panting. Pass the order. Lord Rickard and the Great Jan are to lead troops in pursuit of the enemy soldiers retreating into the town. Smaldon and Eddard will take their cavalry and block Casterly Rock. Everyone else may plunder freely, then turn over 80% of what you seize afterward. But they must obey the orders I gave beforehand. No wanton killing. No sexual violence. Anyone who violates military law will be punished. Have Cray lead the overseers and inspect them. In the town of Lannisport, tens of thousands of merchants and small folk hid inside their homes, trembling as they listened to the chaos outside, where every sort of sound blurred together. In the eastern district, inside a newly built two-story house, a couple in their mid-30s hid in an upstairs bedroom with their 14-year-old daughter. The husband held a wooden club as thick as a wrist and stared nervously at the bedroom door, which he had blocked with a wardrobe. His wife held their daughter in her arms, both of them curled in the corner of the room. A loud crash came from downstairs as the front door was broken open. Then came footsteps and the clatter of things being knocked over and smashed. Hearing the sounds below, sweat kept beading on the husband's forehead. His hands tightened around the wooden club again and again, and he looked visibly terrified. Behind him, his wife and daughter held each other tightly, their curled-up bodies shaking without pause. Thump, 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 crash. Footsteps came up the stairs. Then the bedroom door was shoved violently from outside. Because the wardrobe blocked it, the men outside failed to push it open. Crack. The sound of an axe chopping into wood followed. Clearly, the intruders outside were hacking at the bedroom door. Knowing the worst had come, the husband, who had been terrified, looked back at his wife and daughter. When he turned forward again, his eyes had become firm, and his trembling hands slowly steadied. Crack! Under the intruders' violent blows, the wooden bedroom door was hacked apart, and the wardrobe behind it was shoved over. The husband saw a burly figure step into the room. He swung the club with all his strength. The club struck the man's right shoulder with a dull thud. The burly soldier bared his teeth and sucked in a breath from the pain, then turned and punched the husband in the face. The wife hiding in the corner saw her husband fall with his face covered in blood and could not help screaming. Hearing the noise upstairs, the intruders downstairs also came up. There were 3 intruders in all dressed like typical northern soldiers. They were large men with fierce faces, wearing standard mail marked with a sigil of 2 crossed long axes guarding a black crown. After the other 2 northern soldiers entered the bedroom, they began searching constantly for valuables, gold dragons, silver stags, jewelry, and gold objects. The burly man struck in the shoulder kept rubbing it while studying the mother and daughter in the corner. Lannisport had many collateral members of House Lannister, or poorer distant kin. The mother and daughter clearly had the golden hair of House Lannister. Though their faces were full of fear, their fair skin and pretty features were still plain to see. Ha, ha. The burly man rubbed his right shoulder hard and walked toward the mother and daughter with a leering smile. Seeing the desire in his eyes as he approached, the mother and daughter knew what would happen. They immediately let out piercing screams. Hey, remember the military law the judge read out? If you make one mistake, our whole squad will be punished with you. We came here to get rich. With money, are you afraid there will be no women? Do not do something stupid. The 2 northern soldiers searching the room naturally heard the mother and daughter screaming. They frowned and called out to the burly man. Can the rotten goods in a brothel compare to these 2 Lannisters? If you do not say anything, who will know what happened here? Damn it, we win a battle and are not even allowed to vent? To hell with military law. To hell with the king in the north. Hearing them, the burly man turned and answered crudely. Then he grabbed the mother, tugging at his own breeches while tearing at her fine clothing. Screams and sobs immediately filled the house. Seeing that their warning had failed, the other 2 northern soldiers exchanged a look, shook their heads, and continued searching for valuables to put into the bags they had taken. Thud, thud. The burly man had just loosened his breeches and torn away the woman's clothing when 2 heavy objects hit the floor behind him. He turned at once and saw several soldiers in Lannister armor pulling bloodied longswords from the bodies of his 2 companions. As the burly man turned, a burst of terrible pain struck between his legs. He screamed and looked down. The naked woman before him had somehow found a small, delicate dagger and driven it into him. Then a long sword stabbed into the back of his neck, cutting his scream short. Davin pulled his longsword free from the northern soldier's neck and pushed the corpse aside. Then he tore off the cloak from his own back and wrapped it around the naked woman. Lord Davin, this civilian is only unconscious. He is still alive. One guard checked the husband's condition and reported to Davin. Davin nodded, then turned to the wife and said, nowhere outside is safe. Your house has already been turned over badly, so no one should come search it again for a while. Do not close the door. Hide here properly. Also, make yourself and your daughter look as dirty as you can. Thank you, my lord. Hearing the woman's thanks, Davin rose with a determined expression and led his squad of guards downstairs, continuing along the street toward the Lannisport Guard headquarters. The more than 1,000 guards under his command had already broken into 10-man squads, using the streets they knew well to fight while retreating. Lannisport was large. On foot, there was no way to escape quickly. Davin and the others were retreating toward Casterly Rock. As a member of House Lannister, he naturally knew how strong the rock was. Most of Casterly Rock's guards had now been taken away by Tywin, and fewer than 1,000 might remain. Given the enemy's current numbers, if they disregarded losses and attacked continuously, they might truly have a chance to take it. But if Davin's 1,000-odd guards entered that high-walled, heavily fortified stone castle and helped defend it, he believed the stone fortress that had never fallen would still stand in the Westerlands. Yet the guard headquarters Davin was now heading toward lay in eastern Lannisport, not in the same direction as Casterly Rock to the north. That was because Davin had not seen Stafford while fighting the enemy at the harbor. Worried about his father, he had deliberately taken a detour. Behind the retreating Lannister soldiers, Lord Rickard and the Great Jan each led nearly 1,500 northern soldiers in high spirits, pursuing and killing at their heels. Because more than 1,000 recruits had also fled into the town, Lord Rickard and the Great Jan had begun splitting their troops to pursue them. They would not distinguish between guards and recruits. In their eyes, all of them were fleeing battle honors. But as they gradually pushed deeper into the town, their forces became more and more scattered in the unfamiliar streets. In a narrow alley, a squad of 9 Lannister recruits escorted Stafford north through Lannisport. Behind them, 12 Karstark soldiers were pursuing. The young recruit at the rear was cut in the heel by a Karstark soldier. He screamed and fell. His scream did not last long. The other Karstark soldiers quickly surrounded him and swung their swords, opening more than a dozen deep bloody holes in his body. This cannot go on. Let us turn and fight them. Seeing their comrades stabbed to death by enemy swords behind them, one recruit could no longer bear it and shouted, "Yes, fight them. There are only a few more of them than us. We may not lose." If you win, I will reward each of you with 5 gold dragons. Hearing this, Stafford immediately encouraged the recruits beside him with heavy rewards. The recruits heard the promise of gold. Since the enemy before them were men, not that terrifying giant wolf, they glanced at one another and nodded. They immediately raised their weapons and charged back at the pursuing Karstark soldiers. Seeing them entangle the enemy, Stafford's face brightened. He fled north through the alley alone. Those recruits were clearly no match for the Karstark soldiers. After a brief, bloody fight, the 8 recruits managed to take only 2 Karstark lives with them before they died. That noble they protected had golden hair. He must be a Lannister. That is a great prize. Brothers, catch up to him. After killing all the enemies, one Karstark soldier looked in the direction Stafford had fled and spoke. His words clearly won agreement from all of them. The 10 Karstark soldiers immediately continued forward in pursuit. Rip. The 3 men at the front of that Karstark squad had just run out of the alley when a dozen long swords from the left and right greeted them. Unable to dodge, the 3 Karstark soldiers were cut down at once. When the rest of their companions emerged, they discovered nearly 30 Lannister soldiers waiting in ambush at the alley mouth. Even though the Karstark soldiers were better fighters, they were badly outnumbered. After killing 5 enemies, all of them were slain. Seeing that the pursuers behind him had finally been killed, Stafford let out a breath of relief. He turned to the 20-odd guards and said, "I am Stafford Lannister, father of your commander, Daven. Escort me to Casterly Rock at once." "Yes, my lord." Lannisport had fallen fully into chaos that day. In the northern and eastern parts of the town, tense and brutal fighting still continued, while the western and southern districts had become a feast for plunderers. Although Robb had ordered the military judges to emphasize discipline before the battle, northern soldiers like the ones Daven had killed were far from rare during this feast of looting. Cray kicked open the door of a room from which a woman's sobs were coming. Inside lay the corpse of a male civilian. Several naked northern soldiers were pinning down a sobbing civilian woman and taking turns assaulting her. Violation of military law. Take them all. As soon as Cray spoke, several fully armed overseer soldiers rushed in from outside. They first had the northern soldiers put their clothes back on, then bound their hands with prepared rope and escorted them away together. The overseers in this battle numbered an unprecedented 2,000. In truth, they were the 2,000 Winterfell soldiers Cray had led to surround Pike. Robb had already guessed that this sort of thing would certainly happen during the sack of Lannisport, so he had directly assigned those 2,000 soldiers back under Cray's command. After receiving Robb's order, Cray divided the 2,000 overseers into small squads and had them patrol the looting districts in a wide net of inspection. Because the king in the north had established collective punishment under military law, most northern soldiers focused on plundering wealth and were able to restrain their desires. Even if a few could not restrain themselves, the comrades in their squads, in order to avoid collective punishment, could restrain them. So an entire squad violating military law together was rare. But among a force numbering in the tens of thousands, even rare cases added up. In less than half an hour of looting, 70 or 80 soldiers who violated discipline had already been caught by the overseers. Most of those 70 or 80 were Ironborn who had sailed the longships and followed the northern army in attacking the harbor. Lord Cray, 2 of our overseer squads were arresting men in the western district, but a northern noble led men in resisting them. I slipped away quietly to report to you. Just as Cray walked out of the house, a nervous overseer hurried over and reported, "Gather the nearby overseers. With me." Cray's face showed no anger when he heard it. He had already expected situations like this. His tone remained calm as he gave the order. "Yes." The overseer soldier nodded and immediately turned to gather men. When Cray brought more than 100 overseers to a fine residence in the Western Harbor District, the first thing he saw was 19 overseer soldiers kneeling on the ground with bruised faces. Nearly 100 northern soldiers surrounded them. Draw steel? Attacking the overseers is treason against the realm. Refined and handsome as Cray was, anger surged in him when he saw his men humiliated like this. He shouted the order at once. Clang, clang. The more than 100 overseers behind him immediately drew their long swords and prepared for battle. "I am Roose Ryswell, Lord of the Rills and son of Lord Roderick Ryswell. Your overseers attacked me first, and now you accuse us of treason." A disheveled young man heard the commotion outside and ran out of the fine residence, loudly questioning Cray. "The military law of the king in the north forbids wanton killing and sexual violence. You violated military law and attacked the overseers. That is treason." One look at the young man's appearance was enough for Cray to guess the reason behind the matter. This ruse had certainly violated military law. The overseers had moved to arrest him, and his house soldiers, trying to protect him, had beaten and disarmed the overseers. "Heh. My father is Lord of the Rills. My sister is Lady of Barrowden. I was named after Lord Roose Bolton. In any case, I am also kin to Lord Ramsay Bolton. I only had my fun with a few commoners. What is the problem? You think you can arrest me?" Roose directly threw out his background, his expression arrogant. "I don't care about your bloodline." "Good. Since you admit you violated military law, there is nothing more to say. Brothers of the overseers, seize him. Anyone who blocks you dies here. If there is any problem, I will answer for it." "Yes." After Cray gave the ruthless order, the overseers tightened their grip on their weapons and formed neat 10-man battle lines, slowly pressing toward Roose and his men. Seeing that Cray was truly willing to act over a few lowborn civilians, Roose gritted his teeth and shouted, "Kill them? Do not worry. If there is trouble, I will protect you. Kill." The soldiers from the rills heard Roose's words, drew their weapons, and charged the overseers. Help! Just as the two sides were about to collide, a huge figure flashed past behind the rill soldiers. Then Roose's cry for help rang out. Everyone turned toward the sound. The king in the north sat on the back of the armored giant wolf. In the wolf's mouth was Roose, who had been so arrogant moments earlier. Now he was sobbing, snot running down his face, loudly begging for rescue. "Cray, arrest them all." Robb's cold gaze swept over the rill soldiers, and he spoke loudly to Cray. Under Bloodwind's intimidating, icy stare, the rill soldiers did not dare resist at all. Besides, their master Roose was still in the giant wolf's mouth. "I will escort them to the harbor. Cray, continue your task." After the overseers bound all the rill soldiers, Robb spoke. "Yes, your grace." Theon led most of the Ironborn and Northern forces from this expedition to completely defeat the Lannister fleet, then brought nearly 1,000 prisoners to Lannisport's harbor. The first thing he saw was Robb mounted on Bloodwind, along with hundreds of soldiers bound and kneeling on the harbor ground. Among them were both Ironborn and Northern soldiers. Beside them, most of the Northern lords stood silently. None of them spoke. "Since everyone is here, I will pass judgment." Receiving the command, Bloodwind slowly lowered his massive body. Robb jumped down from his back and spoke loudly. "Your grace." Seeing that Robb had not asked anyone's opinion before passing judgment directly, Lord Roderick of the Rills could not help calling out. "Military law is iron. Last time, because everyone begged, I made one exception for Lord John. There will not be a second. In the name of the king in the north, I declare that every soldier who violated military law is sentenced to beheading." Robb held the already unsheathed ice and ignored Lord Roderick completely. He walked slowly toward the kneeling soldiers as he announced the sentence aloud. The moment his words fell, he stopped before Roose Riswell. Looking at the tears and snot covering Roose's face, Robb raised ice without mercy and brought it down. Roose's head fell to the ground and rolled to Lord Roderick's feet. Seeing his son's head, Lord Roderick immediately burst into tears. Swish, swish, swish. Robb did not entrust the beheading of hundreds of men to anyone else. He carried out every execution himself. The harbor was terrifyingly quiet. Everyone watched Robb, now covered in blood as he beheaded one man after another, and a chill rose in their hearts. Robb had expected the current situation. This had always been part of his plan to establish authority, one step in setting military discipline. Daenerys Targaryen, a woman, could restrain Dothraki riders after victory and stop them from committing sexual violence. Robb believed he could do the same. This attack on Lannisport happened to be the Northern Army's first act of plunder. Robb wanted to establish discipline now, before they tasted too much sweetness and became even harder to restrain. The discipline of Winterfell's direct troops was no problem at all. After this show of authority, the Northern soldiers should be manageable as well. The most difficult men were actually the Ironborn led by Theon. For them, sexual violence after victory was almost a way of life. That was why Robb had specifically had Theon take most of the Ironborn to fight the Lannister fleet. He feared that if all the Ironborn violated military law, he would have to behead all of them. As Robb raised and lowered his sword, executing one man after another, great amounts of red mist gathered toward him. He continued adding points to Bloodwind as the executions went on. Once he had invested a total of 1,000 Bloodpact points, the Direwolf's pack attribute could no longer be increased. "Awoo!" Bloodwind suddenly threw back his head and howled, as if sensing something. Robb turned at the sound and saw a great amount of red mist rising from Bloodwind's body. It formed a red sphere that wrapped tightly around him. Before Robb's eyes, layer upon layer of red mist wrapped around Bloodwind. He could not see what was happening inside at all. Still, since the change had come from the Blood Pact, there was nothing for him to worry about. He turned back and continued the beheadings that had not yet ended. Nearly 30 soldiers who had broken military law remained. Robb's cold, ruthless methods had frightened them into loud weeping and pleas for mercy. But this was meant to establish iron military discipline and awe the entire army. How could Robb possibly spare them? Thud, thud, thud. When the last law-breaking soldier's head was cut off, Robb was soaked in blood from head to toe, like a man made of it. He planted ice heavily against the ground, swept his gaze over the silent harbor, and said in a clear voice, "Under my command, military law is iron, and reward and punishment are clear. Plunder is permitted. Wanton killing, rape, and abuse are not. If anyone disagrees, say so now. I will allow you to take your house's soldiers and leave Lannisport. But from that moment on, you will no longer be my vassal, and you will no longer belong under my rule." When Robb finished speaking, his gaze passed over the Ironborn nobles standing behind Theon. All of them lowered their heads in submission. Those clever men understood that they were different from the Northern nobles. With the king in the North's iron-blooded methods, if they truly took their men and left, they would likely never return to the Iron Islands alive. Robb's gaze moved past the Ironborn nobles and swept through the Northern lords. Lord Roderick Riswell, tears streaming down his old face, seemed about to speak. Beside him, his daughter, Lady Barbary Dustin, reached out and gripped her father tightly, giving him a discreet shake of her head. In truth, she and her father had long been dissatisfied with House Stark. When she was young, she had once given herself to Brandon Stark of the previous generation, but Brandon had ultimately chosen to marry Catelyn Tully. Lord Roderick had then tried to have her wed Robb's father, Eddard. After Rickard and Brandon died together in King's Landing, however, the younger Stark inherited his brother's betrothal and married Catelyn. Barbary had twice failed to marry into House Stark. She had then wed Lord Willem Dustin of Barrowden. Less than half a year after the wedding, Eddard called the Northern Banners for Robert's rebellion and took Willem south with him. Willem followed Eddard to the Tower of Joy. In the end, only he and Howland Reed returned to the north alive. Because of the chaos of war, Eddard could not even bring Willem's body back. So Barbary's resentment toward the Starks had long been buried deep in her heart. But this time, Eddard Stark had died in King's Landing, and the Blood Wolf Lord, whose fearsome name had spread through the north, had summoned all his vassals. If they had not answered the call, they would likely have been the first ones used by the Blood Wolf Lord to establish his authority. So after discussing it with her father, she had prepared to make a show of serving him. To fulfill the nominal duty owed by noble vassals, each of them had brought only 500 soldiers to Winterfell in answer to the summons. Who could have known that the other northern nobles would nearly empty their houses' foundations? On the very first day Robb returned to Winterfell, they had jointly acclaimed him king in the north. Swept along by that great tide, she and her father could only submit all the way south with the northern army, until they somehow found themselves in Lannisport. Today, before Lannisport had even been fully occupied, her younger brother Roose had been beheaded by this king in the north because of a few commoners, all to establish military discipline. Seeing her father impulsively want to ask to leave, Barbary immediately pulled him back. She had heard the meaning beneath the king in the north's words. You could take your men and leave. But once you left, you would no longer be his vassal, and you would no longer accept his rule. In this war sweeping all of Westeros, if you were not his friend, you might become his enemy. And what methods he used against enemies did not need to be said. Robb, of course, saw the movement between father and daughter. Apart from Lady Maege Mormont of Bear Island, Barbary was one of the only female lords in the north, so he had paid some attention to her before. Still, Lady Barbary had always kept to the rules. On the march south, she had remained quiet and said little, with no unusual actions. After quietly noting the two of them, Robb showed a satisfied expression and nodded. Good. I am honored that you have all chosen to continue serving me. Now, so long as military law is not broken, continue plundering Lannisport. Together, we will empty this prosperous town. Yes. Hearing Robb personally allow them to continue plundering, the northern nobles and all the soldiers answered excitedly, then immediately turned and charged into the town. Cray, pile these corpses and heads together. Have the overseers set up checkpoints at the harbor exits. Everyone must turn over 80% of what they seize. Return Roose's body to Lord Roderick. As the crowd around the harbor gradually dispersed, Robb turned his head and gave the order to Cray beside him. Yes, Your Grace. Cray nodded, then immediately took men to handle it. Once Robb had made the arrangements, Theon came forward with Ramsay and Quentyn to report the results of the battle. Your Grace, the Lannister fleet is made up of large oared warships. They are not as nimble as our longships, but they are better suited for carrying troops, food, and supplies. Aside from a few that were badly damaged, more than 60 can be put to use after light repairs. Well done. Theon, when the final gains from Lannisport are counted, I will set aside 1/10 as your reward for military merit. Haha. Thank you, Your Grace. Seeing Theon's broad smile of thanks, Robb suddenly turned his head toward Ramsay and Quentyn. Ramsay, Quentyn, you do not need to stay here. Take some men into the town and see what you can find. Yes, Your Grace. Ramsay and Quentyn immediately saluted and withdrew. Robb, is something wrong? Theon saw Robb send Ramsay and Quentyn away and at once stepped closer, lowering his voice. Robb did not answer his question. Instead, he asked, Theon, what state is Bloodwind in right now? Bloodwind? He gave that strange howl just now, and now he is lying on the ground asleep. Robb, did all that killing blur your eyes? He is that big and you cannot see him. Theon looked at Robb in surprise as he answered. He had no way of knowing that, before Robb's eyes, Bloodwind had been completely hidden by a sphere of red mist. Knowing Bloodwind was likely undergoing a transformation, Robb nodded and brought the conversation back to business. Leave that aside for now. First, the important matter. I specifically had you stay because I want you to choose a reliable group of men and carefully search along the Sunset Sea beneath Casterly Rock for a secret entrance. Casterly Rock has a secret entrance. Theon's eyes widened sharply, and he immediately asked. Tyrion mentioned it by accident when we talked in Winterfell. He was once responsible for repairing Casterly Rock's sewer system. His father also forbade him from bringing whores into the castle. So when he worked on the sewers, he deliberately left a secret entrance for himself. He never said exactly where it was, but it should be somewhere in the bay beneath Casterly Rock. Robb half lied and half told the truth to fool Theon. In any case, he could not go and ask Tyrion to confirm it. There is such a thing? If that is true, then this legendary castle that has never fallen could actually be taken by us. Tisk, tisk. I heard the Lannisters' gold is piled up like mountains. Robb, we are going to be rich. The entrance had not even been found, but Theon's eyes were already full of excitement, as if he had taken possession of all the Lannister wealth. Do not get excited too early. Find the secret entrance first. That is the first matter. The second matter is this. Once we have fully secured Lannisport, use every ship we have and begin moving all the people of Lannisport to the Iron Islands. Robb glanced at the excited Theon, warned him, and continued with the other business. Move the people? Oh, to bring them back as thralls? Then we cannot move everyone. Old people and children cannot work. We need to choose able-bodied young people. Theon considered the second matter seriously. Theon, do not let iron-born thinking rule your mind. You will never accomplish anything great that way. What is the foundation of Tywin's rule? These merchants, craftsmen, and small folk who create wealth for him. Whether we move them to the Iron Islands or to the north, it is the same as digging out his roots. And what is this about only taking young people? Many of the old here are skilled craftsmen with years of experience. Children are a family's future. We must take them together if we want them to truly settle down. Robb patiently taught Theon, wanting him to truly learn how to think and rule, not merely burn, kill, and plunder like a pure ironborn. Theon looked at Robb's serious expression and nodded thoughtfully. I understand, Robb. You think this war will not end easily in a short time, so this is about weakening Tywin bit by bit. Good. It seems you have learned quite a bit lately. Now go and find Casterly Rock's entrance. I will stay here and watch over Bloodwind. Robb nodded in satisfaction. Good. Wait for my good news. Clatter, clatter, clatter. Smaljin rode toward Casterly Rock with Gendry and 500 Winterfell light cavalry. Because Lannisport's harbor was crowded with merchant ships of every size, the Northern Army's transport longships had not been able to dock properly. As a result, the horses aboard could not easily disembark by gangplank. After receiving the order, Smaljin and Ed spent a long time getting some of the transport longships to shore and gathering 500 war horses. Time was tight. After discussing it with Ed, Smaljin left him behind to continue moving the war horses ashore. Then he took Gendry, who had joined the cavalry on Robb's orders, and set out first to scout Casterly Rock. Casterly Rock stood atop a towering mass of stone. Even though Smaljin and the others had never been to the Westerlands, they could still tell the direction. Clearly, they had already lost enough time. The road to Casterly Rock was full of fleeing small folk and scattered Lannister soldiers. When they saw the Northern riders, they fled into the woods on either side of the road. Smaljin and the others had a scouting mission and did not pursue them. They rode straight for Casterly Rock instead. As the cavalry drew closer to the rock, they saw a group of about 300 Lannister deserters ahead on the road. Enemy sighted. Prepare to attack. At Smaljin's order, nearly 100 riders at the front leveled their steel lances forward, while the horsemen behind them, armed with bows, skillfully began to draw and loose. Gendry, on his first battlefield, was extremely nervous. He wore armor he had fitted to himself, engraved with the sigil of a black bull, and the bull-headed helm he had forged. His hands gripped a long-handled warhammer tightly. After constant training during this period, his horsemanship had improved rapidly, which was why Robb had allowed him to follow Smaljin into battle. As the two sides closed quickly, the Lannister soldiers, knowing they could not stand against so many cavalry, split into two groups and fled to either side of the road. Under Smaljin's command, the Winterfell riders split in two and gave chase. Gendry followed Smaljin on the right side of the road. Ahead of him, Smaljin was like a great demon, thrusting again and again with a steel lance, easily harvesting Lannister lives. Nervous, Gendry rode swiftly up to a young Lannister soldier whose face was full of panic. He used all the strength in his body to swing the long-handled warhammer in his hands. Crack! The heavy hammer smashed solidly into the young soldier's face. The enormous force behind it shattered his facial bones outright. Teeth, broken bone, and an eyeball flew through the air with a spray of blood. The young soldier did not even manage to scream before he fell dead. After completing his first kill, Gendry felt as if some power inside his body had been unlocked. The long-handled hammer in his hands swung left and right at the enemy. Some blows struck heads, others chests or backs. Amid the sounds of bones breaking, 7 or 8 Lannister soldiers were killed by his hammer in moments. If Eddard could have seen this scene, he would certainly have felt that Gendry now carried something of Robert's presence in his youth. While those damned northern riders were cutting down the other soldiers, Daven was desperately fleeing. He felt he had truly fallen on the worst luck, always being hunted and forced to run for his life. He had finally gathered nearly 300 guardsmen and recruits and was about to reach Casterly Rock, only to be overtaken from behind by hundreds of northern riders. After glancing back at the Lannister soldiers being slaughtered, he squeezed out what little strength he had left and ran toward the woods. A loud horn sounded from the rock castle above. Then Casterly Rock's gates opened, and nearly 800 Lannister cavalry rode out from the castle toward the northern riders. Clearly, they had seen their comrades being pursued and had come to rescue them. Enemy cavalry sighted. Stop pursuing. Retreat, retreat now. Smaljin saw the Lannister riders coming out of Casterly Rock at once. He immediately called off both pursuing groups and ordered the Winterfell cavalry to withdraw. This showed Smaljin's growth. In the past, he would certainly have charged straight into the enemy without a second thought. Now, seeing that the enemy cavalry not only outnumbered them, but also held the advantage of terrain and were charging downhill, he had no need to clash head-on while at so many disadvantages. As the Winterfell riders withdrew, the fewer than 100 remaining Lannister soldiers finally let out a breath. Daven also breathed in relief. Looking at the Lannister cavalry drawing closer and closer, he waved his arms while hopping in place and shouted, "I am Daven Lannister, Lord Tywin's cousin. Take me back to Casterly Rock." As time passed, night gradually fell. Many soldiers who had gone out to plunder returned one after another to rest aboard the longships in the harbor. After all, spending the night outside could mean being attacked at any moment by Lannister soldiers who had not yet been fully cleared out. At the checkpoints set up throughout the harbor, the overseers recorded spoils in order and searched men as they passed. This time, no northern soldier or ironborn voiced dissatisfaction. The blood-dripping heads of the lawbreaking soldiers, piled atop hundreds of corpses, served as warning signs for everyone. Lannisport truly was wealthy. At each checkpoint, the spoils visibly piled up at speed, becoming mountains of wealth that could tempt a man into sin. It was only natural. The difference between the Westerlands and the North was like the difference between a rich, crowded homeland and a poor border province in Robb's previous life. Robb paid no attention to the spoils from this plunder. Washed and dressed in clean clothes, he focused entirely on the sphere of red mist wrapped around Bloodwind. The night grew deeper. Robb still stayed beside Bloodwind, while his personal guards stood watch in silence at a distance. Suddenly, the motionless sphere of red mist began to change. Robb immediately sharpened his focus and stared hard at it. A small bulge rose on the surface of the mist, then smoothed away again, as if something inside were taking shape. The surface kept bulging and flattening, like water coming to a boil. When it reached the height of that boil, the sphere of red mist suddenly shrank inward at extreme speed, leaving nothing behind as it poured back into Bloodwind's body. Robb's eyes widened. He stared fixedly at Bloodwind, waiting for the change in him. Yet Bloodwind, lying on the ground, showed no change except for several symmetrical streaks of white wolf fur on either side of his head, set against his original gray coat. His body had not suddenly grown enormous. No scales had sprouted across him. His head was still only one head. Seeing that none of the changes he had imagined had appeared, Robb felt somewhat disappointed and focused his mind to check Bloodwind's attributes. Name, Bloodwind. Contractor, Robb Stark. Physique, 30. Magic, 1. Species, Frost Dire Wolf, 1. Pack, War Wolf, Nymeria. Servant Wolf, Lady. Blood Pact points, 63. Surprise? Looking at Bloodwind's blood pact attributes, Robb knew that although there had not been much outward change, an earth-shaking transformation had taken place inside him. The new blood pact attributes had merged his former constitution, speed, and strength into a single physique attribute. The 1 point of magic that had appeared after it was clearly a new attribute added after the transformation. A creature with magic was no longer an ordinary creature. It already belonged in the realm of the supernatural. The species had changed from 6 telepathic ice dire wolves to a single frost dire wolf. Robb guessed that this meant Bloodwind had evolved into a completely new species of giant wolf, the only one in all Westeros. Bloodwind, how do you feel? Seeing that the dire wolf still had not opened his eyes, Robb asked. At the sound of Robb's voice, Bloodwind opened his eyes. The yellow eyes he had once had were now like 2 clear, shining crystals of ice. Hungry. So hungry. The moment he opened his eyes, Bloodwind sent Robb a strong thought of hunger. At the same time, his nose twitched. He immediately rose and ran to the side, swiftly reaching the hundreds of corpses that had been used as warning signs and beginning to feast. Robb followed behind him. Looking at Bloodwind as the wolf buried his head and ate without stopping, the king, long since used to it, shook his head helplessly. But the personal guards behind him could not help backing away, their throats bobbing nervously. The pile of several hundred corpses visibly sank. When Bloodwind finally finished eating, Robb sent him a thought, telling him to use magic. Bloodwind, the corners of his mouth still covered in blood, received the thought. A glint flashed through his ice crystal eyes, and threads of white mist drifted from his body. Robb stretched his right hand close to Bloodwind and could clearly feel an icy chill invade it. His entire hand began to go numb and stiff. After a quick test, Robb hurriedly pulled his right hand back to his mouth and breathed on it again and again to warm it. Can magic be used in other ways? Still breathing onto his hand, Robb continued sending thoughts to Bloodwind, asking how else he could use magic. Bloodwind tilted his head and glanced at Robb. The white mist rising from his body instantly drew inward. He lowered his head toward a severed head and opened his jaws. A cloud of white mist far denser than the vapor around his body poured from his mouth, wrapping around the head and freezing it into a lump of ice. Ice breath. Daenerys's dragons have dragon fire, and my Bloodwind has ice breath. It is still weak now, but he can keep growing. Watching the white mist from Bloodwind's mouth slowly vanish, Robb clapped his hands happily. His heart filled with endless expectation for the direwolf's future. Right. Add points. Suddenly remembering that he still had blood pact points, Robb focused and added 1 point to Bloodwind's magic attribute. A great surge of red mist unlike anything before rose from Robb's body and entered Bloodwind. Bloodwind's magic attribute changed from 1 to 2, but Robb's blood pact points dropped from 63 to 13. Absurd. 1 point of magic actually costs 50 blood pact points. That is 25 human lives. Robb discovered that the plus sign beside physique had not disappeared, so he tried adding 1 point there as well. Red mist rose again. Bloodwind's physique became 31, and Robb had only 3 blood pact points left. So 10 blood pact points add 1 point of physique, and 50 add 1 point of magic. It seems that if I want to keep raising Bloodwind, I truly will have to become a killer of thousands, even tens of thousands. Knowing that his hands would inevitably be stained with blood in the future, Robb shook his head helplessly. In my previous life, I was clearly just an unnoticed office drudge. In this life, I will become a ruthless lord who kills by the tens of thousands. But what exactly is the blood pact? Why did the red comet affect it? Robb, whose thoughts had begun to wander, suddenly reflected on his golden finger. He remembered that when the red comet had appeared several days ago, he had not yet reached the brink of losing control, yet it had nearly driven him there. And before, once all of Bloodwind's attributes reached 30 points, he could no longer keep growing. It was also because of the red comet that he had now leapt directly into becoming a supernatural creature. There still is not enough information. But there must be some connection. Forget it. Rest first. I will deal with it when the time comes. Without any clearer idea, Robb patted Bloodwind, who had obediently lain beside him after breathing out ice, then turned toward the great Kraken. During Lannisport's quiet night, the small folk slowly fell asleep with uneasy hearts. Davin, who had not found his father at the guard station, continued hiding with his men in the eastern district of the town. In the harbor, the northern army gradually fell asleep aboard their respective longships. A cloaked figure quickly entered one large longship. Inside the cabin, Lord Roderick and Lady Barbary looked at the figure and smiled. Thank you for accepting our invitation, Lord Ramsay. Lord Roderick, Lady Barbary, we are relatives of a sort. There is no need to be so courteous. You invited me here this time. What is the matter? Ramsay pulled down the hood of his cloak and spoke with a smile. Good. Then let us come straight to the point. Lord Ramsay, what do you think of the Blood Wolf Lord? Lord Roderick nodded and brought the topic directly to Robb. The king in the north? Wise beyond his years, brave and skilled in war, disciplined and merciful. Ahem. Lord Ramsay, there is no one else here. You need not flatter him so much. My father's meaning is this. He killed Lord Roose Bolton, and he killed our younger brother Roose as well. Do you think such a man deserves our loyalty? Barbary coughed lightly, cutting off Ramsay's words of praise for Robb, then spoke the knight's subject even more directly than her father had. At first, I thought you were testing me. Since you can speak so directly, I am naturally willing to share my true thoughts. A strange light flashed through Ramsay's eyes. Then his familiar smile immediately appeared as he continued. Of course he does not deserve our loyalty. He killed my most beloved father. I remember that hatred in my heart. It is only that his prestige is too high now, and he has gathered the Northern Army and the Ironborn. Even if the three of us wanted to resist, we do not have the strength to match him. A father's murder. But Lord Ramsay, all the North knows that you were rewarded for opening the Dreadfort. That is why he made you Lord of the Dreadfort and granted you the Bolton name. Barbary nodded, raising a doubt that mattered deeply to her. That is precisely Robb Stark's despicable nature. At the time, his army caught me in a surprise attack. Then he had some Winterfell soldiers disguise themselves as my men and force me into the Dreadfort. After that, they blew open the Dreadfort's gates. In the end, he not only spared me, but spread that story outside, deliberately rewarding me before everyone. But most of the Dreadfort's soldiers are controlled by a man named Sam, someone he specifically sent to watch me. Ramsay showed a face full of anger and spoke of certain facts that Barbary and her father had not known. We truly did not know these things. Still, through certain channels, we have heard a little of this Sam who controls the Dreadfort's guards. He is indeed a man from Winterfell. Barbary nodded. Combined with the information she knew, Ramsay's version felt more real and more logical to her. No normal person would betray his own father and house merely to become a puppet lord. What is your plan? Ramsay took a deep breath, calming his anger, then asked. In truth, my father and I began planning long ago. As soon as we landed in Lannisport today, we secretly sent men to contact Casterly Rock and have them pass on a letter written to Lord Tywin. So long as he agrees to our terms, we can provide him with the Northern Army's movements, tactical plans, exact positions, and other intelligence. However, after what happened today, Robb Stark will certainly be somewhat wary of me and my father. And you, Lord Ramsay, command 1,000 Ironborn and get along well with Theon Greyjoy. I believe you can certainly obtain much important intelligence from him. Barbary exchanged a look with her father. Seeing him nod, she told Ramsay what they had done in secret. Ramsay listened to her account, then asked thoughtfully, from the beginning, you believed Robb Stark absolutely could not win this War of the Five Kings. Of course. Eddard Stark, who once won battle after battle, is dead. Lord Tywin's fearsome name is known throughout the Seven Kingdoms, even among old men and children. Now, even if Robb Stark and Theon Greyjoy joined hands and unexpectedly took Lannisport, they absolutely cannot take Casterly Rock. Moreover, the North has always had few people. These 30,000 soldiers were difficult enough to gather, and they will only grow fewer as the war goes on. By contrast, the well-populated Westerlands can keep recruiting fresh soldiers to replenish its losses. I also heard that Renly Baratheon has joined with Highgarden and gathered 100,000 men, more than 3 times the North's number. Do you truly think Robb can destroy the Lannisters, destroy the other kings, and sit the Iron Throne? Hearing you say it like this, I think it is impossible as well. Unless a miracle happens. After listening to Barbary, Ramsay first smiled and nodded in agreement. Then he put away his smile and continued seriously, I am willing to join you. But once Lord Tywin replies, I will present my own terms and see whether he accepts them. Of course. I believe this Lord Tywin who shits gold will certainly be generous enough to agree to your terms. I look forward to it. Good. I have been gone too long. I must go back at once. Good night, Lord Ramsay. Good night. After saying farewell to Barbary and her father, Ramsay put his hood back on and left their longship. After walking a dozen steps, he turned his head and looked at the longship where a conspiracy had just taken root, murmuring, "Eddard Stark, victorious in 100 battles? You still have not truly understood how terrifying this young king in the north is. Still, you have given me a fine opportunity." The corner of Ramsay's mouth lifted in a smile, and he turned to walk on. He circled through the harbor district for a while before finally arriving before a large warship with guards standing watch. "Halt! Who goes there?" The two Ironborn guarding the warship saw the suspicious Ramsay and immediately questioned him. Ramsay pulled down his hood and smiled at the two Ironborn guards. "I am Ramsay Bolton. Please report to Lord Theon that I have important intelligence." Russell, Russell, Russell. Davin led more than 20 guardsmen, moving carefully as they hid in the woods beside the road to Casterly Rock. Ahead of them, at least 1,000 northern riders had made camp at a narrow pass. For them to slip quietly past was simply impossible. This checkpoint was the cavalry camp chosen by Smulgen and Gendry after their retreat the day before, when they joined up with Ed's reinforcements. Casterly Rock was a stone castle that was easy to defend and difficult to attack. On 3 sides, sea-facing cliffs protected it, and only one road could be used to assault it. But for that same reason, the Lannister soldiers entering and leaving Casterly Rock had to pass along that road as well. So the place where Smulgen and the others had made camp happened to choke off Casterly Rock's throat. "Lord Davin, what should we do now?" one guardsman asked Davin in a low voice. Davin considered for a while, then said decisively, "It is impossible to reach Casterly Rock now. We return to Lannisport. Find a way to get horses, then take a detour to Crake Hall and inform Lord Roland Crake Hall." Outside Moat Cailin, in the Lannister army's camp, the mood inside the command tent was extremely heavy. After all the probing attacks during this time, Moat Cailin's 3 towers still stood there as steady as stone. The army of House Frey, used as a testing stone, had suffered terrible losses. Their original force of 4,000 men had been reduced to fewer than 1,500. After thinking about it during this period, Stavron Frey had finally understood. Lord Tywin had not valued him. He had meant to use them as cannon fodder. So now, wearing the distinctive cap of House Frey, he said nothing, lowering his head as he huddled in a corner of the council table. "Moat Cailin is as hard to take as Casterly Rock. In my view, we should return and join Lord Kevin, then take Riverrun in one stroke." Lord Leo Lefford of the Golden Tooth loudly gave his opinion. "Go to Riverrun? Then do we simply abandon this place? If we attack Riverrun and Robb Stark takes the chance to bring his army south along the King's Road straight toward King's Landing, what then?" Lord Louis Lytton of Deep Den shook his head and objected. "We can divide our forces. Leave part of the army camped here, and send another part to reinforce the attack on Riverrun." Ser Harry's Swift, the Knight of Cornfield, raised his hand to speak, refining Lord Leo's suggestion. Ser Adam Marbrand, heir to Ashmark, did not agree with Ser Harry's. He said, "If we divide our forces, how should we divide them? Robb Stark has 30,000 men. If too few troops remain in camp, he will swallow them whole. If too many remain, then sending a small force to reinforce Riverrun will have no meaning." Yes, Ser Adam is right. Dividing the army is not wise. But if Riverrun falls, the Riverlands will be entirely in our hands, and we can seize all House Tully's wealth. As soon as Ser Adam finished speaking, discussion broke out. Adam was also quite satisfied that his words had won agreement. When the voices calmed a little, he continued with the plan he had considered for some time. "I believe we should either return to the Trident and thoroughly conquer and plunder the Riverlands, or simply go back to Lannisport, board the Lannister fleet, sail around Moat Cailin through the Sunset Sea, invade the north, and fight that wolf cub to the death." That is a bold suggestion. Adam truly deserves to be the cavalry commander Lord Tywin personally appointed. Either retreat or advance. Decisive and clean. Of course. He was Lord Tywin's page at Casterly Rock when he was young. He learned quite a bit from him. When Ser Adam finished, praise filled the command tent. Tywin sat silently at the head of the council table, expressionless as he listened. No one knew which decision he preferred. Seeing no one else speak, Tywin said in a low voice, "At present, we do not know the movement of the northern army behind Moat Cailin, so, Lord Tywin, urgent message from Casterly Rock." Just as Tywin began to speak, a Lannister soldier rushed into the command tent. He shouted his report while holding up a raven letter. Tywin frowned slightly, took the unopened letter, and immediately unfolded it. Clatter, clatter. Tywin quickly read the letter. His face turned extremely ugly, and he slammed one hand onto the council table. The force sent several cups wobbling and falling to the ground. The command tent suddenly fell silent. Lord Tywin, always cunning, composed, and steady, had suddenly lost his composure. That clearly meant the letter carried terrible news. These slick Westerlands nobles wanted no part of that displeasure. They immediately lowered their heads and fell silent. Robb Stark has taken Lannisport. Tywin knew the news could not be hidden for long, so he simply said it outright. What? Impossible. How could Robb Stark be in the Westerlands? Did he fly there? The instant the news was spoken, the command tent boiled over. Every Westerlands noble wore an expression of disbelief. While we were still at Moat Cailin, he attacked the Iron Islands. Balon Greyjoy died by suicide. Theon Greyjoy became the new king and submitted to this king in the north. 30,000 northern soldiers boarded ironborn longships and launched a surprise attack on Lannisport. After that, they should besiege Casterly Rock. Tywin controlled his emotions and stated the contents of the letter in one breath. The Northern Army and the Ironborn have allied? Lord Tywin, Casterly Rock has high walls and strong defenses. It cannot fall in a short time. I think the entire army should immediately reinforce Lord Kevin and take Riverrun quickly. Now that the situation had changed completely, Ser Adam immediately offered Tywin his advice. No, Casterly Rock is not only the ancestral seat of House Lannister. It is also a legendary castle that has never fallen. It is the symbol of the Westerland's invincibility. Nothing can be allowed to happen to it. Knowing exactly what Casterly Rock represented, Tywin shook his head and rejected Adam's suggestion. His eyes fixed on the military map on the council table. He nodded, made his decision, and ordered, Adam, take all the cavalry and return to Casterly Rock through the Golden Tooth at the fastest speed possible. I do not need you to defeat the entire Northern Army. You only need to make sure they cannot focus on attacking Casterly Rock. As you command. Ser Adam immediately nodded and accepted the order. The rest of you will come with me to reinforce Kevin. Riverrun must be taken in the shortest time possible. Yes, as you command. After everyone accepted their orders and quickly left the command tent, Tywin began writing a reply to the northern noble mentioned in the letter, the one who wished to join his side. Ever since he had learned that all his spies in the north had been rooted out, Tywin had been like a blind man. Now that a northern noble had offered allegiance, he was more than willing to accept. As Tywin's orders went out, the entire Lannister army began moving at once. More than 10,000 Lannister cavalry rode down the King's Road toward Casterly Rock. The next day, on the Sunset Sea, in a certain bay, an ordinary Ironborn longship slowly moved along the coast near Lannisport. All the Ironborn aboard craned their necks, carefully watching the shoreline for any cave. Below that cliff, there is a small, inconspicuous hole. One Ironborn suddenly pointed in a direction ahead and shouted. After discovering what might be the target, the Ironborn longship abandoned its slow pace and swiftly sailed toward the small opening beneath the cliff. Once they drew near, the Ironborn saw clear traces of artificial carving inside the cave. They immediately understood that this was their target. Thinking of the rich reward King Theon had promised, the Ironborn carefully marked the location on their chart and immediately returned. When they arrived back at Lannisport, Robb was discussing something with Theon. Hearing their report, both men's faces lit with joy. After heavily rewarding them as promised, Robb said to Theon, "Then what we discussed earlier is settled. Tomorrow I will summon the Northern Army to besiege Casterly Rock. When Bloodwind's howl sounds, that will be the signal. You will take men through the secret entrance and open that side gate for me. In future histories, both our names will be recorded, because this stone castle that has never fallen will be taken by us." "What? You want us to go to Bitterbridge at once as envoys?" Not long after the sun rose above the sea, Lord Roderick repeated Robb's order in surprise inside the captain's cabin of the Great Kraken. Robb nodded, his face serious. "Yes. I hear Renly's 100,000-strong army is camped at Bitterbridge. Lord Roderick, I would trouble you and Lady Barbary to go persuade Renly Baratheon to join us in surrounding and destroying House Lannister. Your Grace, may I ask boldly why you chose us, when there are so many northern nobles?" Barbary shook her head at her father, who had been about to argue, then asked the question herself. "I trust you, and I believe you have the ability to handle this matter well. So why would I not choose you?" Hearing her words, Robb naturally showed a surprised expression and answered, "Thank you for your trust. We will handle this matter properly. If there is nothing else, we will go back and make preparations, Your Grace." Barbary knew she could not refuse. She respectfully saluted Robb, then pulled her father out of the cabin. As soon as they left the king in the North's large warship, Lord Roderick could no longer endure it. He looked left and right, then asked in a low voice, "Barbary, why agree to go to Bitterbridge? We have not even received Lord Tywin's reply. And after we leave, how are we supposed to report the intelligence here to him?" "Father, his decision to make us leave the Northern Army cannot be changed no matter what. Even if it were not a mission to Bitterbridge, he would arrange some other task for us." Barbary first turned her head and answered her father in a low voice. Then, looking toward a certain longship in the harbor, she continued. "If he is making us leave only because of ruse, that is one thing. If it is because of Ramsay, you mean Ramsay may have betrayed us." Lord Roderick understood his daughter's meaning. His eyes widened, and in shock he forgot to keep his voice down. "Shh, father. It is only my guess. Whether it is true or not, we still need to test Ramsay." "Good. We go now." Unable to hold his temper, Lord Roderick immediately strode toward Ramsay's longship. Seeing her father so impatient, and wanting to know the truth herself, Barbary followed closely behind. After the father and daughter saw Ramsay, they tested him with all manner of words. Ramsay smoothly deflected them, playing the fool and brushing them aside. Seeing this, Barbary simply asked directly, "Lord Ramsay, my father and I were ordered by Robb Stark to go to Bitterbridge today. This matter should have nothing to do with you, should it?" You are going to Bitterbridge? Nothing to do with me? What does that mean?" Hearing Barbary's words, Ramsay first looked puzzled, then immediately showed sudden understanding. "Oh, you suspect that I informed on you to Robb Stark? Lord Ramsay, he gave us this order suddenly today. We are worried he is looking for a reason to move us out of everyone's sight, and then, Lord Roderick saw that Ramsay understood and spoke his concern directly. By the honor of House Bolton, I swear to the gods above that I, Ramsay Bolton, absolutely did not inform Robb Stark. Ramsay immediately swore with great seriousness, guaranteeing that he had not informed on them. In this world, oaths carried considerable credibility for certain reasons. Hearing this, Barbary immediately smiled and softened the mood. Lord Ramsay, there is truly no need for that. How could we not trust you? We are about to set out for Bitterbridge. I will tell you how to contact Casterly Rock. During this time, I must trouble you to pass intelligence to Lord Tywin. No problem. I am still waiting to ask Lord Tywin for my reward. Rest assured. So long as he can satisfy my terms, I will pass intelligence seriously. Do not worry. He will certainly satisfy you. The method of contact is, after Barbary and her father conspired with Ramsay for a while, they returned to their own longship to pack. Before long, soldiers sent by the king in the north came to urge them along, saying the king in the north was already waiting for them to depart. At midday, father and daughter left Lannisport's southern district with a few family retainers. They had originally wanted to take the nearly 900 remaining soldiers of their houses with them, but Robb dismissed that with a single sentence: if you bring 1,000 men to Bitterbridge, are you envoys or an army? Clatter, clatter, clatter. On Casterly Rock's first wall, and atop all its towers and watchposts, more than 1,000 Lannister soldiers ran about busily. Some carried stones the size of heads, while others carried quivers full of arrows. On the wall, a large number of male servants were heating great iron pots filled with boiling oil. Ever since Daven had returned to Casterly Rock the day before, he had naturally taken overall command from the castle's castellan, as he held the highest position and the highest standing in the family there. At present, Casterly Rock had around 1,050 soldiers left to defend it. Nearly 800 were cavalry, while only a little more than 150 were infantry. Added to that were almost 100 lucky members of the Lannisport Guard who had survived and reached the rock. Daven knew that with the enemy's numbers, there was no need for their cavalry to ride out in a sortie. So he ordered without hesitation that all cavalry dismount and serve as infantry, assisting in the defense of the walls. There were also several hundred male servants inside Casterly Rock, and he summoned them as well to help defend the castle. As a man who had once followed Tywin in the attack on King's Landing during Robert's rebellion, he possessed basic military common sense. However, he also possessed the Lannister habit of self-admiration. He thought rather highly of his own military talent. He always felt that he was an excellent general, in no way inferior to Tywin, and that he had simply never had a suitable stage on which to display himself. Jaime and Tyrion's private assessment of him, however, was this: Daven Lannister was a thoroughly mediocre commander. Daven had prepared all sorts of defensive measures so early because he believed that after taking Lannisport, the Northern Army would certainly besiege Casterly Rock as quickly as possible. After all, Casterly Rock would certainly notify Lord Tywin, and his army would hurry back to reinforce it as fast as possible. The Northern Army's only choice was to storm Casterly Rock as quickly as they could. And since Casterly Rock had high walls and strong defenses, it could not possibly be taken in a short time. So if the North wanted to take it before Tywin's army returned, forcing an immediate attack was the most correct choice. As a result, on the second day after he returned to Casterly Rock, all the soldiers stood on the walls in high spirits and waited for an entire day. Only a few Northern scouts came on horseback, looked over the defenses from beyond bowshot, and turned away. Late that night, Daven was sleeping soundly in the castle when he was startled awake by noise from the walls. He immediately jumped out of bed and hurried outside to ask what had happened. It turned out that soldiers on the forward watchtower had seen dense torches appear outside the castle and immediately rung the alarm. But it had only been a false alarm. The roughly 2,000 Northern cavalry had reached the Lion's Mouth, the broad approach before the main gate where 20 horses could ride abreast, then immediately turned back without attempting to attack. After being tormented like this again and again, by the third day, the soldiers on the wall were clearly in worse spirits than they had been the day before. The third day was exactly like the second. Northern scouts came by day, and the enemy came at night to harass them. The only difference was the time at which they were awakened. By the fourth day, many defenders actually fell asleep while standing guard on the walls. Their condition was seen clearly by the Northern scouts who came to observe. After several days of this torment, not only the soldiers and servants who spent every day and night on the walls, but even Daven, who rested in a comfortable bed inside the castle, felt he could no longer bear it. In truth, remaining tense all the time would have been better. This sudden tightening and loosening of nerves was even more torturous. On the fourth night, at the watchtower before Casterly Rock's main gate, the Lion's Mouth, 4 fully armed Lannister soldiers stood their routine watch. 2 of them had eyelids that kept drooping, and they swayed as they nodded off. The other 2 forced themselves to stay awake by chatting, though the deep shadows beneath their eyes showed their condition clearly. They are coming again? Are they not tired of this? One of the chatting soldiers looked at the 1,000 torches moving toward them in the distance like a long dragon and spoke impatiently. Should we ring the alarm? The other chatting soldier asked. Not yet. Let us see whether they come and leave right away like the last 2 nights. The men who rang the alarm those nights were punished for false warnings. The soldier hesitated, then answered. Fine. In truth, there was no need for them to ring it before. The enemy was all cavalry. How could cavalry attack a castle? Are they going to ride their horses up Casterly Rock's walls? The other soldier nodded and grumbled about the previous watchman. As the torches drew closer, the two soldiers widened their eyes, trying to make out the details. It seems, they are not cavalry. What are those long things? I cannot see clearly. Their discussion woke one of the soldiers who had been dozing. He rubbed his eyes and leaned forward to look. His expression slowly shifted from drowsy confusion to horror. They are carrying scaling ladders. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. A dozen sharp sounds cut through the air. The 4 sentries on the watchtower were each struck by at least 2 arrows in an instant. The soldier leaning out to look was hit and fell directly from the tower into the deep rocky drop below. The dragon-like line of torches approached Casterly Rock. More than 10,000 northern soldiers carried long scaling ladders, 1 torch for every 5 men, and advanced steadily toward Casterly Rock by the faint light. They were not discovered by the exhausted defenders on the walls until they had nearly reached the main gate. Enemy attack! Enemy attack! Loud, panicked shouts rang out through Casterly Rock. Every soldier and servant forced himself awake and began the life and death defense of the castle. Casterly Rock had 3 entrances in total. The broadest was the main gate on the road, the Lion's Mouth. To the left and right were narrower side gates, each near a sea-facing cliff. Every entrance to Casterly Rock was protected not only by towers and watchposts full of archers, but also by high stone walls, sturdy oak doors, and iron portcullises. As a stone castle that had never fallen, its defenses truly were extraordinary. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The defenders on the walls hastily drew bows and loosed arrows. Their aim was poor, and the northern soldiers carried one-handed shields, but enough arrows always took a few unlucky lives. At the very front, more than a dozen mail-clad soldiers of House Riswell and House Dustin were struck through gaps by arrows, bleeding as they fell. That fresh red blood opened the siege of Casterly Rock. As the dozen arrow-struck men fell, the soldiers behind them immediately filled the gaps, lifting the scaling ladders and approaching Casterly Rock quickly. The closer they came to the castle, the brighter the light became. The northern soldiers were already close. After only 1 volley from the defenders, they reached the wall, raising their long ladders. Bang, bang, bang. From atop Casterly Rock's walls, large numbers of hard stones the size of heads fell downward. Their own weight, combined with the force of the long drop, made them terrifying. When they struck one-handed shields, cracks instantly spread across the wood. Some weaker shields were smashed apart outright, breaking into uneven fragments. Those stones that struck northern soldiers directly shattered bones and sent men collapsing while coughing blood. As for northern soldiers struck in the head, there was no possibility of survival. The lucky ones had only part of the skull smashed in, leaving at least enough to identify them. The unlucky ones had their entire faces smashed to pulp, the flesh, blood, and brain matter mixed into a blurred red mess. In an age without soldiers' identification tags, such bodies could not be identified at all. Only after comrades confirmed that the man was missing and had not fled the battlefield could his name be entered into the rolls for death compensation. Casterly Rock truly deserved its reputation as a castle easy to defend and difficult to attack. Even fighting in haste, the defenders used every means available. The northern soldiers had not even touched the battlements. Those who nearly climbed to the tops of the ladders were met head-on by scalding oil. Their flesh burned and split as they clutched their faces and fell back below the wall. The siege of Casterly Rock raged with terrible brutality. Davin hurried over with his clothes in disarray. When he saw the bloody scene, he immediately understood that this time, it truly was the main army attacking. In front of nearly 1,500 defenders made up of Lannister soldiers, guardsmen, and household servants, the northern army would have to sustain a long siege and pay losses more than 10 times greater if it wanted to take this sturdy stone castle. But that was obviously only his calculation from historical siege records, made on paper. Reality would be shaped by all sorts of factors. The Lannister soldiers were clearly in poor spirits, while the northern soldiers, who had eaten and slept well for several days in advance, were fresh and full of energy. As the intensity of the siege increased, the more than 800 Lannister soldiers at the main gate gradually felt their strength running out. The hands drawing bows grew sore and weak. The men throwing stones also lost strength. Even the servants pouring oil no longer had the same speed and precision they had at the start. One northern soldier seized the moment when a servant was scooping boiling oil, leapt onto Casterly Rock's battlements, and cut a huge gash in the servant's neck with one sword. But the brave northern soldier was stabbed full of bloody holes by several Lannister soldiers with spears in the next instant and fell back below the wall. Such a situation was actually normal. 1 or 2 enemies would always find a chance to leap onto the battlements in the chaos. As long as no true gap opened in the defense and the enemy could not stand firm on the wall, it was not a great problem. Davin, however, was clearly startled badly by it. He immediately ordered the messenger beside him, quickly transfer the soldiers from the side gates here to help defend the main gate. Lord Davin, the side gates also need defenders. Behind Davin, the former Castellan of Casterly Rock reminded him, I am not telling you to pull everyone away. Leave a few dozen men to guard them. The side gates are narrow, and the cliffs beside them are steep. A large-scale attack there would be impossible. If they truly attack from both sides, then the pressure at the front will ease, and I can send soldiers to reinforce them. Enough. Go deliver the order. If you delay and the main gate falls, the consequences will be unimaginable. Clatter, clatter, clatter. The defenders at Casterly Rock's 2 side gates received Davin's order. Each gate kept 50 men behind, and a total of 600 defenders began gathering at the wall by the main gate. With these fresh troops joining in good condition, the northern soldiers' faint signs of reaching the top were instantly suppressed. Screams, blood, severed limbs, and corpses were the eternal themes of war. Less than an hour had passed since the siege began. The nearly 900 soldiers of House Ryswell and House Dustin whom Robb had deliberately placed at the very front had basically been killed or wounded to the last. After them came the infantry of House Umber and House Karstark, who had volunteered to serve as the vanguard in the assault to atone for their failure in the pursuit at Lannisport. Seeing that the siege of Casterly Rock was unfolding exactly as he had planned, Robb, mounted on Bloodwind, slowly appeared within sight of the defenders on the main gate wall. Because tonight's action would take place in darkness, Bloodwind's wolf armor was too conspicuous. At this moment, he wore no armor, and Robb sat on his furry back, gripping the wolf fur at his neck tightly. Awoo! At a thought from Robb, Bloodwind carried him swiftly to the now empty watchtower. Facing the crescent moon hanging in the middle of the sky, the dire wolf raised his head and howled. That penetrating wolf howl could be heard not only across Casterly Rock, but even vaguely from Lannisport. Hearing the howl, all the northern soldiers attacking Casterly Rock saw their morale suddenly rise sharply. Fearless of death, they threw themselves at the wall. The defenders could clearly feel that these northern soldiers were different from those before, in spirit and in their powerful bodies. Many northern soldiers who fought their way to the top were drenched in boiling oil the moment they stood on the battlements. But instead of screaming and falling backward, they screamed and lunged forward at the servants or Lannister defenders in front of them. Many unprepared defenders and servants were counter-killed by these badly wounded northern soldiers. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The northern army's archers, who had remained silent until now, heard the wolf howl and ran into range. They immediately launched covering fire toward Casterly Rock's walls and the castle interior. Among the arrows they loosed were ordinary iron-headed arrows and specially prepared fire arrows. The messenger beside Davin was struck in the left cheek by a stray arrow. The iron arrow pierced through his cheek, lost its force, and simply hung there from his face. Listening to his screams and seeing his miserable state startled Davin badly. He turned and saw wagons and debris inside the castle being set alight by fire arrows. He hurriedly pointed at the former castellan of Casterly Rock. "You take charge of defending the wall. I will gather men to put out the fires." After saying this, he did not wait for the castellan's reply. He hurried down from the wall alone. These northern barbarians are mad. They attack like they do not want to live. This is nothing like the war books I read. Davin muttered to himself as he quickly walked toward Casterly Rock's inner wall. I should go back to the castle. Even if the outer wall falls, there is still the inner wall as a second line of defense. He walked a little farther and reached the defensive tower on the far left side of Casterly Rock, a necessary path toward the inner wall. Suddenly, the door of this defensive tower, now unmanned because the soldiers had been transferred to the main gate, slowly opened from within. Davin stared, dumbfounded, at the Ironborn inside the tower, whose appearance was unmistakable. Once he reacted, he immediately opened his mouth to shout. A sharp arrow shot out from inside the tower door and flew straight into Davin's open mouth, silencing his shout forever. Theon walked out of the tower holding a wooden bow. He glanced at Davin's corpse on the ground, then immediately led a dozen Ironborn forward, sneaking toward Casterly Rock's left side gate. Robb rode Bloodwind from the watchtower on the left toward Casterly Rock's left gate. The road to the left gate was rugged and difficult, completely different from what Robb had seen on television in his previous life. So he had brought no northern soldiers, only one man and one wolf moving quietly. Robb did not use a torch for light. To Bloodwind, who could see at night, darkness was no different from day. The wolf carried Robb and moved nimbly along the edge of the cliff. The Lannister defenders on the wall had their attention drawn entirely by the fierce northern soldiers. How could they notice the giant wolf hidden in the dark? Careful. Something is running over there. When Bloodwind passed the narrow, broken road and drew close to the left gate, the defenders above the wall, aided by the light of the burning braziers, caught a glimpse of a huge grey shadow flashing through the darkness. Awoo! Seeing that he had drawn attention, Robb simply had Bloodwind move a little closer and give short howls as he ran swiftly. The soldiers on the left gate wall immediately grew nervous and drew their bows into the darkness. But how could they possibly hit Bloodwind, who was running back and forth at great speed and constantly changing position? Whoosh, whoosh. The defenders on Casterly Rock's left gate wall were fully drawn by Bloodwind outside the castle. Their eyes widened as they searched for the grey shadow in the dark, loosing arrows again and again. Bang, bang. Below them, 2 gate guards were struck by arrows fired from the darkness and died cleanly where they stood. Hearing Bloodwind's short howls outside the wall, Theon led a dozen Ironborn and rushed toward the gate. One defender on the wall heard movement below and turned to look. Theon, who had been watching the situation above as he ran, put an arrow through his eye socket. The man screamed and fell from the wall. That movement instantly threw the defenders on the wall into chaos. They immediately turned and tried to deal with Theon and his men. By then, however, Theon and the others had already reached the gate below the wall, vanishing from sight and making it impossible to attack them. Creak, creak. As the defenders on the wall hurried down the stone steps, Theon and 7 or 8 Ironborn seized the thick, long gate bar together and heaved it upward with all their strength. Screech. The bar was thrown heavily to the ground. They immediately pulled open the 2 thick oak doors and raised the iron portcullis in front of them. More than 20 Lannister defenders came down the wall stairs. But below the wall, the gate area had become strangely quiet. That obviously wrong silence made them stop. The defenders in the rear pushed the 2 men at the front, signaling for them to keep moving. The 2 looked at each other, swallowed, tightened their grips on sword and shield, and summoned the courage to move toward the gate together. They kept close to the wall and reached the corner by the gate. One defender gathered his courage and stuck his head out to look. The instant he did, a huge grey shadow flashed before him, and he fell into eternal darkness. Hiss, hiss. The other soldier behind him reached up and touched the warm blood on his face. He stared blankly at the headless corpse before him as blood still spurted from it. The huge grey shadow stopped not far ahead. It was a terrifying giant wolf with grey fur, a dripping human head held in its mouth. Monster? Monster. The defender whose face was covered in blood was so frightened by Bloodwind that his mind nearly broke. He began shouting again and again, but he shut his mouth immediately. Robb stepped out from the gate with ice in hand. The greatsword wheeled once in his grip and directly beheaded the shouting defender. Awoo! Acting with Robb, Bloodwind spat out the head in his mouth, launched himself forward on all 4 legs, and charged into the defenders caught between advancing and retreating, beginning a merciless slaughter. Surges of red mist rose. Robb and Bloodwind, 1 man and 1 wolf, were simply unstoppable. These defenders could not withstand them at all. Whoosh, whoosh. Theon and the others quickly followed behind Robb. After running out through the gate, they immediately turned and looked upward, firing arrows at the wall to cover them. In only a few minutes, Robb and Bloodwind killed all 20+ defenders. Before the giant wolf, they did not even have a chance to flee. Robb added the newly gained blood pact points to Bloodwind's magic attribute, then had the wolf climb the stone steps to the wall and deal with the defenders above. After a burst of shrill screams, endless red mist rose from the wall and entered Robb's body. Awoo! Once all the defenders at the left gate were dealt with, Bloodwind received Robb's thought, stood amid a pile of corpses, blood, and severed limbs, and raised his head in a long howl. At Casterly Rock's main gate, a group of northern soldiers heard the wolf howl, lit torches, and followed the rugged path toward the left gate. But their torchlit group was far too obvious. The archers on Casterly Rock's wall saw their chance and loosed a volley. The northern soldiers suffered no small number of casualties and found it difficult to continue forward through the arrow rain. Theon, hold this place. Bloodwind and I will see whether there is a chance to open the main gate. Plans could not keep up with changes. After waiting a long time without reinforcements, Robb thought briefly and spoke to Theon. Robb, be careful. Do not worry. Bloodwind can use magic now. Robb replied meaningfully. When Bloodwind came to him and crouched, he turned and climbed onto the wolf's furry back. Theon paid no attention to what he thought was a joke and watched Robb vanish around the corner on Bloodwind. Clang, clang, clang. At Casterly Rock's main gate, in addition to the many scaling ladders, more than a dozen northern soldiers were carrying a solid wooden battering ram, striking again and again at the iron portcullis outside the oak doors. The portcullis clanged under the blows, but in reality, they had little effect. For a strong castle gate like Casterly Rock's, unless the attackers had a proper wheeled battering ram, a crude self-made ram like this could strike as long as it wanted and still be unlikely to shake the gate at all. What they did not know was that Bloodwind, carrying Robb, was approaching the main gate along the shadowed part of the wall where the firelight did not reach. On the main gate wall, under the orderly command of Casterly Rock's Castellan, the defenders were locked in a tug-of-war of flesh and blood with the northern soldiers. The battle was fierce and close. As time passed, the balance of the siege had already begun tilting toward the defenders of Casterly Rock. After all, the attackers' losses in a siege would certainly be higher than the defenders. Below the main gate, 4 defenders stared only at the gate being struck again and again, ignoring what lay behind them. A huge grey shadow swiftly arrived behind them. Bloodwind's 2 sharp claws and terrifying jaws could only handle 3 enemies. At the same time, Robb leapt down from Bloodwind just as the wolf steadied himself. Ice in his hands chopped diagonally at the final defender. Enemy attack. But this last defender reacted extremely quickly and shouted at once. Robb landed, and his greatsword cut him diagonally in 2, but that final shout had already alerted the soldiers on the wall above. Casterly Rock's main gate likewise had sturdy oak doors, and behind them was a wooden bar far thicker and longer than the one at the side gate. Robb tried it. Even with his great strength, it was difficult for him to move the bar. Fortunately, Bloodwind was beside him. At a thought, he immediately had the dire wolf try. Bloodwind hooked upward nimbly with his forepaws. The sharp claws on both paws dug deep into the wooden bar, and his strength, already beyond human comparison, directly flipped the heavy bar hard to the ground. Creak. Still with Bloodwind's help, Robb opened the 2 heavy oak doors. But when he saw the iron portcullis outside the oak doors, he froze. The iron portcullis at Casterly Rock's main gate was controlled by a finely made iron lock embedded inside the gate. It required a key to open. Gods. Even if Bloodwind's claws are sharp, they cannot tear through a lump of iron like this. Just as Robb found himself at a loss, he suddenly remembered an old film from his previous life. In it, even a steel-boned Terminator could not withstand liquid nitrogen. The material of this fine iron lock certainly could not compare to the alloy from that film. The low temperature produced by Bloodwind's magic like ice breath should be fully enough. It is worth trying. Robb nodded inwardly, pointed directly at the middle of the iron lock, and ordered, "Bloodwind, use ice breath here." Bloodwind immediately drew a deep breath, opened his jaws toward the lock, and breathed out white ice mist. Crack, crack, crack. His current magic attribute of 3 points was clearly far stronger than the single point he had before. The fine iron lock was instantly frozen into a block of ice. At the same time, as white mist continued flowing from Bloodwind's mouth, the ice spread outward as if alive. "He is opening the gate? Stop him." The castellan on the main gate wall had come down with dozens of defenders to check the situation. When he saw the oak doors already open and Robb standing before the portcullis, he immediately shouted in alarm to the soldiers beside him. At that moment, Bloodwind's magic was exhausted. Robb suddenly raised ice with both hands and brought it down with all his strength at the middle of the fine iron lock, now a great lump of ice. Crack! The fine iron lock shattered beneath Robb's blow as easily as brittle pastry. "The gate is open? Charge into the castle. Hurry! I want the first merit. Charge, charge, charge." The northern soldiers outside saw the portcullis open, abandoned the wooden battering ram, and swarmed into Casterly Rock. "It is over." Watching the ant-like northern soldiers pour constantly into Casterly Rock, the castellan stood frozen in place. Rip! The swarm of ants instantly drowned him, and sharp swords stabbed him into a torn sack. The more than 1,000 defenders on the wall saw that the gate had fallen and no longer had the heart to keep fighting the northern soldiers. One after another, they rushed toward the inner wall on the left, trying to rely on the castle's second line of defense. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The northern reinforcements from the left, led by Theon, directly blocked them from the wall at the left gate, cutting off their retreat. A wolf before them and a tiger behind. Clang! The Lannister defenders lost all will to fight. They threw down their weapons one after another and knelt to surrender. The siege of Casterly Rock had, without anyone noticing, lasted from the deep night before dawn until first light of the next day. When the sun rose from the sea, the roaring lion banner atop Casterly Rock was cut down. Immediately afterward, the dire wolf banner was raised, fluttering in the sea wind. It meant that this stone castle, founded before the Age of Heroes and never once taken, had suffered its humiliating first fall. It also meant that the old balance of power in Westeros had been broken, and a new situation would bring earth-shaking change. The heavy iron door of Casterly Rock's underground storeroom finally could no longer withstand the repeated impacts of great force. It collapsed heavily to the ground. "Light the braziers." Theon, standing beside Robb, looked into the pitch-black storeroom hall and ordered the Ironborn nearby. Several Ironborn moved along both sides of the hall, using the torches in their hands to light one brazier after another. The unusually broad storeroom was suddenly bright with fire. The storeroom was a square hall about 6 yards high and 50 or 60 yards long and wide. Thick pillars carved with roaring lions stood throughout the hall, steadily supporting the wide underground space. On the left side of the hall were neat rows of weapon racks stacked nearly to the ceiling, holding brand new weapons of every kind. Most of them were swords, great swords, broadswords, bastard swords, and more. There were also spears, axes, hammers, bows, crossbows, and arrows in full supply. These weapons had likely been treated against rust. Under the flickering firelight, their sharp edges flashed coldly now and then. On the right side were similarly neat rows of armor, heavy plate, ordinary plate, scale armor, mail, and leather armor. Every piece bore the roaring lion sigil of House Lannister. If northern soldiers wanted to use them, they would still need to spend some money hiring smiths to alter the style and replace the sigil. As expected of the Golden House, these finely made weapons and armor could equip an elite army of nearly 10,000 at any time. Robb walked down the central aisle of the storeroom hall with Theon and the northern lords who had taken part in the battle. Having always lived in the poor north, he finally saw today what true wealth meant. Gods! The workmanship on this equipment is excellent, and the quality is outstanding. The soldiers of my house still take turns using worn equipment left by the previous generation. Surely this is not only the Lannister family's storeroom? Are we certain this is not the storeroom of all Westeros? Listening to the northern lords behind him exclaim and talk among themselves, a smile appeared at the corner of Robb's mouth. It seemed he was not the only country bumpkin from the north. After walking for a while, Robb and the others reached the end of the storeroom, where 12 black wooden chests had been arranged in a row. Each chest was roughly 2 feet wide and a foot and a half high. "Open them." Robb stared at the chests and ordered without turning back. Hearing him, Theon did not have the Ironborn beside him open them. He personally stepped forward, wanting to see whether the contents were what he imagined. Creak. Theon reached the chests, glanced back at Robb and the silent northern lords behind him, then directly lifted the lid of the black wooden chest. Gulp! Someone swallowed too loudly. In the silence, the sound was especially obvious. But it could hardly be blamed on him. Wealth could move any heart. Inside the black chest Theon had opened, gold ingots as thick as forearms were stacked neatly. Under the surrounding firelight, they gleamed with a mesmerizing yellow luster. Creak, creak. Seeing that the black chest was filled with gold just as he had expected, Theon excitedly opened all the other chests. All of them held gold ingots. Every black chest in the row was the same as the first, filled with gold neatly stacked to the top. Even if the Lannister gold mines had already run dry, even if House Lannister had lent the crown millions of gold dragons, a starving camel was still larger than a horse. The remaining gold Tywin had stored in Casterly Rock alone was already wealth the North could not accumulate in decades, or even a century. Lord Ricard. Lord John. Yes, Your Grace. Your Grace, I am here. Hearing Robb call their names, Lord Ricard Karstark and Great Jon Umber stepped out from behind him and saluted. In this attack on Casterly Rock, House Karstark and House Umber charged bravely at the front and suffered great losses. At the same time, your merit is great. I allow you to choose freely from these spoils. Robb looked at the two northern lords, both extremely loyal and willing to charge into danger for him, and smiled. Hearing Robb acknowledge their merit and allow them to choose spoils first, Lord Ricard and Great Jon immediately saluted happily. Thank you, Your Grace. Great Jon had a straightforward nature and did not think too much. After saluting in thanks, he rushed directly to the black chests. He grabbed forearm-thick gold ingots with both hands and stuffed them into his clothes. These ingots were not only large, but also heavy. After Great Jon had stuffed in only 3, his armor was already packed full, and the weight had pulled it somewhat out of shape. Seeing that nothing else would fit, Great Jon thought for a moment, then took one more gold ingot in each hand and turned to walk back. As soon as he turned, he saw Robb and all the northern lords quietly looking at him. Only then did Great Jon react. An awkward smile appeared on his fierce face. Did I take too much? Haha, Great Jon, one of those gold ingots is worth at least 1,000 gold dragons. You took nearly 5,000 gold dragons at most. That is not too much. But does your castle's savings from all these years amount to 5,000 gold dragons? From among the northern lords came a teasing voice. 5,000 gold dragons? If you can find 500 gold dragons in Last Hearth, I will give you the whole castle. Great Jon did not hear the mockery in the words. He rolled his eyes and honestly revealed his family's wealth. Ha ha ha. Robb and the others could not help laughing together. Not too much, Lord John. I said you may choose as you wish. Robb laughed, then shook his head and spoke seriously. He was never stingy towards subordinates who were willing to risk their lives for him. To establish military discipline and his own authority, harsh punishment was necessary. Generous reward was just as necessary. Beneath Lord Ricard's rough appearance was a rather shrewd mind. Seeing that Robb allowed Great Jon to take 5 gold ingots, he secretly compared their value, then pointed to the armor stacked nearby and said to Robb, Your Grace, I would like 600 full sets of that armor. Robb looked at the armor he indicated. It was a set of fine mail, including gorget, greaves, and full helm. One set was worth about 10 gold dragons. Counting the cost of altering the Lannister sigil and other work, the value was roughly equal to the gold Great Jon had taken. As you wish, Lord Ricard. Since Lord Ricard knew his limits and was not greedy, Robb nodded and agreed directly. Seeing both Lord Ricard and Great Jon receive heavy rewards, Theon looked at Robb with shining eyes. But Robb did not continue distributing rewards as Theon expected. Instead, he turned to the other northern lords and said, House Lannister has also stored a great deal of food. There are 2,000 war horses in the stables as well. In short, anything of value is to be moved out. Yes, Your Grace. Everyone nodded, then turned and left the storeroom, each taking charge of moving Casterly Rock's wealth. What? Are you unhappy because I gave you no reward? Robb turned and saw Theon's displeased expression, then asked. I led the men who opened Casterly Rock's left gate. Even if that is not first merit, it should count as second-tier merit. And yet I get nothing. Theon rolled his eyes and answered irritably. Brother, outsiders need rewards to win their hearts. Do not worry. When the time comes, whatever your Iron Islands need, I will supply. Seeing that no one else was present, Robb spoke with complete sincerity. Brother. Right, Robb. You and I do not need to stand on ceremony so much. Theon savored the word brother, then immediately answered with a bright smile. In truth, he had not really been angry over the reward. After all, Robb had helped him gain his throne as King of the Iron Islands. He had simply risked his life to attack Casterly Rock as well, and he badly wanted Robb's acknowledgement. Right. I forgot to ask earlier. How did you learn that Barbary and her father had betrayed us? Robb patted Theon's shoulder, then suddenly jumped to another topic. Hearing the question, Theon was about to tell the truth. Then he remembered Ramsay, who had given him all the credit and feared being implicated. Thinking that it would not matter much, he paused, then answered, After you killed Roose Riswell, I saw the hatred on their faces, so I sent men to follow them in secret. That night, my spy heard them plotting betrayal and came back to report it to me. Their contact at Casterly Rock is also in my hands. If you want to send Tywin some false intelligence, you can make use of it. Oh, Theon, you are becoming rather impressive. You are already a qualified king of the Iron Islands. Remember to reward that spy properly. It is fortunate their betrayal was discovered in time. Otherwise, if Barbary and her father had leaked my next plan, it would have been trouble. Seeing Theon handle matters cleanly, Robb nodded and praised him, also telling him to reward the spy. Hey, of course. Theon smiled at the praise. Thinking of Ramsay, who had become more and more useful lately, he nodded. Also, keep a close watch over those Lannisters. We will take them with us when the time comes. They still have some value. Do not worry. I have Quentin guarding them with men. Finally, release all the ravens in Casterly Rock. Tell everyone in Westeros that this castle that had never fallen has been taken by us. A raven flew from Casterly Rock and followed the coastal road south. Its destination was Dorne. Below its flight path was the road from Lannisport to Crake Hall. At this moment, a group of 10 riders was moving slowly south along that road. Barbary, why do we not simply find a port and take a ship back to the north? Lord Roderick had been in a foul mood throughout the journey. He spoke to his daughter beside him. Father, the Northern Army cannot win this war. If we do not choose a side and invest now, the next Warden of the North will certainly use the Northern nobles to establish his authority. You do not want our family to become the example, do you? Barbary persuaded her father. She saw things clearly enough to know that Northern nobles like them could not remain above this war. You are right, but... Nay? At the front of the column, a House Riswell rider was suddenly tripped by a taut horse line. The falling horse gave a mournful cry. Lord Roderick and Barbary had been riding near the front. They had no time to rein in before their horses were tripped by the fallen horse ahead, sending them tumbling to the ground. Kill them. Shouts of killing suddenly came from both sides of the road. Nearly 20 Lannister soldiers rushed toward Lord Roderick's group, who had been thrown into chaos with horses and men sprawling everywhere. Slash. When Davin drove his long sword into the chest of the final House Riswell rider, the ambush was completely successful. Several days earlier, Davin had led more than 20 guardsmen back from the road to Casterly Rock to Lannisport, hoping to find horses and ride to Crake Hall to deliver a warning. Who could have known that Lannisport had been plundered clean by tens of thousands of northern soldiers and Ironborn? Valuable things like horses would never be left for them. And with so few men, they obviously did not dare try to steal horses from the heavily guarded harbor district. So they had found some dry rations and set out toward Crake Hall on foot. After several days of walking, they unexpectedly discovered this small party of northern riders coming from the direction of Lannisport. Seeing that the other side had only 10 riders, they simply set an ambush and caught them completely unprepared. Stop! You are Lannister soldiers? I am Lord Tywin's spy. We are on the same side. Lord Roderick, who had been seeing stars from the fall, finally came to himself after all his family riders had died. Seeing the roaring lion sigils on Davin and the others, he immediately waved and shouted, "Yes, yes, we are on the Lannister side as well." Barbary, held at sword point by one of the guardsmen, also recovered and hurriedly shouted with a nod, "Haha, if you say you are Lord Tywin's spies, then you must have something to prove your identity. Take it out and let me see." Davin clearly did not believe Barbary and her father. With a laugh, he directly ordered them to produce evidence. But how could Barbary and her father possibly do that? They had not even received Tywin's reply before being sent off to Bitterbridge as envoys. Heh, brothers, give them a proper welcome. I want every scrap of intelligence they have on the Northern Army. Seeing Barbary and her father look at each other wordlessly, Davin sneered and gave the order to the guardsmen behind him. "No, no, my lord. We are willing to tell you everything we know." Seeing the ill-faced Lannister soldiers approach, Barbary cried out in panic. "My apologies, but I do not trust a word you say now. Enjoy yourselves. I will question you afterward." Davin found a piece of jerky in one of the food bags on the ground, put it into his mouth, and chewed dryly as he answered, "We truly are Lord Tywin's spies. Believe us." Lord Roderick, held by several guardsmen, shouted at Davin, but Davin paid no attention at all. These guardsmen, whose comrades had been killed and whose home had been occupied by northern soldiers, poured out all the anger of the past few days onto Lord Roderick, beating and kicking him until he screamed again and again. "Save some strength. I want him alive." Listening to the shrill screams while chewing his jerky, Davin shouted an order to his men. "Hey, Lord Davin, this northern woman. Are you interested?" A guardsman with an ugly smile leaned close to Davin and asked. Davin naturally understood his meaning. He looked up and assessed Barbary, whose face bore wrinkles, whose figure was tall, and whose brown-gray hair was tied in a widow's knot. She was a woman past her prime, and he shook his head. "No interest. I prefer young girls." "Heh, then can we?" Hearing the subordinate's question, Davin remembered the mother and daughter he had saved, and then thought of the many more small folk in Lannisport he had not been able to save. He said to this subordinate who had followed him from beginning to end, "Do as you like. But I want her information." "Heh, rest assured, Lord Davin. We will make sure to question it out of her."